Yep.
This is Dave
Recording.
Chen's audio. I'm recording.
Dan Trachtenberg audio recording.
Devintra's audio recording.
Jeff's audio recording.
Okay. Let us
Just keep that
begin.
voice for the whole episode.
Okay.
I don't even know who you're impersonating, Jeffrey.
At first, it sounded like Computer G.
Okay, let's begin the countdown. Here we go. 12,
11,
10,
9,
8,
7,
6,
5,
4.
3.
2.
1.
That was from the trailer of The Lost Boys, which was directed by Joel Schumacher. The movie came out in 1987. I'm going to read the plot summary from IMDb. After moving to a new town, two brothers discover that the area is a haven for vampires. Joining us for today's review of The Lost Boys, he is the director of 10 Cloverfield Lane, as well as television episodes of Black Mirror and The Boys. Dan Trachtenberg, welcome back to the Slash Filmcast. Dan, how are you today, sir?
I'm so good, man. This is a long time coming.
It's finally happening.
Yeah.
It's finally happening. So Dan Trachtenberg, as we explained in previous segments of the show and previous episodes of the show, given that movie theaters are not open as of us recording this episode of the podcast, or very few movie theaters are open, we have decided to go back to movies that we either want to force the other two co-hosts to watch, or movies that we never saw. It's on our list of shame, and we want to use this podcast as a mechanism for fixing that. And this movie today, Lost Boys, 1987 movie, is one that you have always wanted Jeff Cannata to watch. Can you explain a little bit about why that is before we go to Jeff and ask him his opinion on the film?
Well, I mean, I think the explanation is obvious in that him having not seen. There's a few movies that Jeff has not seen, and when we used to do Totally Rad Show, Alex had not seen or I had not seen, that are like, this is my personal favorite movie. I'm surprised you haven't seen it. But then there were a few bombshells that were like, this was a huge culturally relevant movie from its era, and how did you not see it? Like, how did you? Especially because Jeff was a couple years older than me. Like, I wasn't able to see it when it came out because it was R-rated and I was too young. But it just seems like a movie. Of course, we've all seen we've just all seen that movie. And for some reason, Jeff hadn't.
And Dan has texted me.
Yeah.
Dan has texted me dozens of times, just out of the blue, like, "Hey, maybe tonight's a good night to watch The Lost Boys, Jeff." And I've always responded, "Dan, I'll watch The Lost Boys when all movie theaters are closed and I am legally not allowed to leave my house. Beyond that, I'm not watching.
Made this happen. Yeah.
Jeff, you saying that reminds me. I think those texts were because I may have given you the Blu-ray of Lost Boys.
This sounds familiar. This is Jeff's Firefly.
Entirely possible.
Years not watching it. Wow.
No. Before I ask Jeff, just one last thing, Dan. Is there a reason you felt like Jeff specifically should watch this movie? You know, like why? Jeff hasn't watched a lot of movies. Let's be honest, guys. Jeff hasn't watched a lot of movies. So
I don't know. I've watched a lot of movies, Dave.
there are a bunch of literally at least 10 movies you could have named other than The Lost Boys to bother Jeff about over the years, Dan. So is there a specific reason why this one felt so important?
I mean, there's plenty of movies on Jeff's list of shame that are like, that's an important movie in cinema history, or, oh, I loved this movie, and it's your tastes. You should watch it. The Jack Bull is that, Jeff, or Oscar even. But this is like saying, we're all talking about The Breakfast Club, and Jeff's like, I haven't seen that, or Goonies, or to a lesser degree, Monster Squad, just to name like horror adventure movies. But it just, to me, this is just a giant part of 80s movie going culture, and I just could not believe that Jeff had not seen it. I will say, I could not be more excited to hear Jeff's thoughts, and this is my first time revisiting this movie my first time revisiting it in a long time. And I definitely, it It wasn't what I entirely what I had remembered. Um, in every direction, though. In every direction.
Yeah.
I want to say though, the first time I watched this movie was scrambled on pay-per-view.
Oh yes, definitely. Yes.
For kids listening, way
The whole
back
concept
in
of scrambled needs to be explained. That's
yes,
crazy.
way back in the 1980s or 90s. If you had either a channel, like my parents had our HBO, and in the East Coast we had a movie channel called Prism, that were locked because they didn't want us to see it unless they unlocked it. Like literally, the device was a key and a box. But I think it was also pay-per-view as well. I think this was on pay-per-view. And if you didn't pay for it on your television set that was square, it would be the video signal was scrambled so that it was multicolored and zigzaggy. You could occasionally kind of make out sort of an image, but you also could hear it completely.
Yeah.
So I listened to the entire movie illegal, like with my parents, not in the basement, and like as soon as they came down to the laundry, I'd have to quickly change the channel.
This is how I watch the Playboy channel, by the way.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
a side note.
I would say most kids would try to watch porn like this, but for Dan, it's the Lost Boys, and I totally get it. This was me too. I get it.
So anyway, that's my table setting for me personally. But I then grew to absolutely adore it, and wear out the VHS of it. So, Jeff, are we gonna hear?
Yeah, Jeff Kanata. Let's go to you. So it was basically such a huge cultural touchstone that it's like not watching Star Wars or something like that. I had a friend recently who had never seen Back to the Future, and it's like,
Right. Wow.
okay,
Yeah.
well, that person needs to watch Back to the Future. But yes, Jeff Kanata, your thoughts on the Lost Boys?
Well, Dave, I guess you could say my thoughts on the Lost Boys are best summed up in the form of a limerick.
Wow. Okay.
Ready for this one? Here we go.
God, I'm so scared.
Well, you can finally relax, Dan. I get why the Lost Boys attracts fans. It's flawed, but it's fun, like two movies in one, and starts with a half-naked sax man.
Yes.
Bravo.
Amazing.
Bravo.
Amazing.
Bravo.
I enjoyed this more than I thought I would. It's a weird movie. It's also like 97 minutes,
Yeah.
which
Yep.
is it's
Nice and
awesome.
tight.
I
Yeah.
love that. Right off the top, I'm like, hour 37? Yes. This movie wouldn't be made today under 2 hours. It would be a 2-hour movie if
This
it was
movie
like this.
would be like a 12-episode Netflix series, today.
Yeah. And I understand why it gets to an hour and a half, because there's a whole lot of stuff that are just like, you don't need to know that. We don't care to explain any of that.
Vampires. That's
Just
it.
take it on our word that that's a thing. And we'll talk more in spoilers about specific things that I was like, I kind of think the movie owes us an explanation about that. But and also I think the action, unfortunately, is a subject of its time in that if we had the benefit of visual effects and some of the things today, I feel like the vision for what is happening would have been expressed a little clearer instead of relying on cuts and sort of weird
Blind cameras. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, Jeff, can I interrupt you there on
Yeah.
that specific point? Because
Sure.
I want to get a sense of what Roger Ebert thought of this movie when it came out. And he's a critic that I often disagree with, but
Yeah.
just to get a sense of things, and there is one line in his review that says, he sometimes I think modern advances in special effects technology can be directly blamed for the collapse of original screenwriting.
Well, I don't disagree with that, and I think people can rely on visual effects in ways that are unnecessary or actually detrimental to the storytelling. And I think this movie does some very clever things. I mean, there's that sequence on the bridge that's amazing, and I think is better for having not the ability to show exactly, like, just using fog in the way that it does is really cool.
Yes, my point is though that just to put everyone in the mindset, these effects that were like mind-blowing and incredible, and he felt at the time, oh my god, these kinds of things are ruining the movie because they
this
think
is
it's
it's so
indulgent in
cutting
visual
edge,
effects.
basically.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I see what you're saying. I see.
Yeah.
So this movie specifically, it was like too much.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And I'm here saying not enough.
Yes, yes.
But I mean, the movie starts like the first shot of the movie is what would be a drone shot today.
Yep.
But because they didn't have drones, it's like 3 different shots cut together. That like
Messy
one's
helicopter shots.
yeah, one's a helicopter shot, one's a crane shot. You know, it's a victim of the vision is a victim of the technology or lack thereof. And I think you could argue that the same movie would be a little bit better. And there's a lot of action in the movie that is like chopped all to hell because they just couldn't visualize. They just didn't have the means to show you exactly what they wanted to show you. But that's sort of all secondary to the fact that this is it's a really fun movie. It's a really 80s movie, but it, as I said in the limerick, I am shocked at how little I knew about this movie going into it. Like how for 23 years I managed to just completely be oblivious to. I had no idea. I knew that Kiefer Sutherland was in it. I knew that Corey Haim was in it. I had no idea that Jason Patric was in it. I didn't know that. That's pretty wild. He's the star. And I really didn't know what it was about other than that it involved vampires. And it's such a cool take on vampires. And like I said in the limerick, it really feels like 2 movies that share the same space. Like Jason Patric is in a horror movie, and Corey Haim is in like this 80s goofy, Home Alone, Monster Squad.
Kids versus the monsters, yeah.
Yes. And the fact that this movie pulls off both of those movies coexisting at the same time is pretty fun and surprising. It's good. It doesn't overstay its welcome. There's a lot of really cool ideas. You kind of think as a kid, you're like, oh, what would I do if my brother turned into a vampire? Or you think, what would I do if I got turned into a vampire against my will? Like those questions are fun questions. That wish fulfillment is really fun. And the movie does a great job of letting you live in that world. And this like vampires, even post this movie, when we got into, the Anne Rice vampirification, and then post Anne Rice was the Twilight vampirification.
Let's not forget Buffy, sir. Like this movie,
Sure.
Buffy exists because of the like style and attitude of this movie and the
That's
sets.
really interesting.
It's so much Buffy. Yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't make that connection probably because I'm not as big a Buffy fan as Dan or you or anybody else here. But that's interesting. I was gonna point out that vampire fiction hasn't really gone to the like beach boardwalk thing, but maybe I guess Buffy is kind of that.
Well, Buffy was never like the beach, but it was definitely like LA teenage vampires invading the
Right.
town and stuff. Like it is very much built on this concept.
It's just a fun mashup of vampires, which are creatures of the night, shadows, mysterious castles in Transylvania, that mythos mashed up with like roller coasters and cotton candy and beach boardwalk and motorcycles. It's like
Saxophone rock. Yeah.
it's such a cool idea to genesis of an idea. And I kind of wish the movie went farther. You get a sense that, especially with that saxophone concert at the beginning, you get a sense like every single person there is a vampire, not just
Could be.
Kiefer and his crew. It feels like everyone who's out past a certain time on this beach boardwalk is a vampire. And I kind of would love more world building in that way in this movie. It doesn't really give you that. It's not really interested in that. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, I had been reluctant to watch this movie for so long and been putting off Dan's texts for so long because I honestly thought I had missed the window on appreciating this. I thought, yeah, if I'd seen it in the 80s, if I'd seen it in the early 90s, if I'd seen it as a teenager, maybe it would have been fun, but I just thought I'm not going to waste my time now watching it. Little did I know it was only 90 minutes, and it's fun. It is fun, and now I get it. Now I get the references, and Kiefer's like really good already.
So
you know,
good.
even
So
in this
good,
movie, he's like,
yeah.
oh, he's real good.
He knows how to lean into his voice in this movie, and like
Yeah.
that seduction just works perfectly for this character. Yeah.
And you kind of get why Corey Haim was a star. You know, it's a very product of the 80s. It's so funny how Corey Haim's like in this different movie where he's wearing wardrobe that you feel like Corey Haim's publicist, you know, insisted that he wore in
Yeah.
this movie.
The cover of Teen Beat.
Yeah, he's like wearing like they're this family that's kind of like down on their luck. Oh, by the way, I also when the movie started, I was like, oh, I get why Dan likes this movie. It's Karate Kid with vampires. Anyway, yeah, they're sort of down on their luck and moving. You know, they have to move away from the big city into this sort of smaller community because they don't have much money. And yet, Corey Haim's wearing like the most expensive clothes that you could get at that time. It clearly was like Corey Haim is Corey Haim, and he's not going to be looking like any other character than Corey Haim. But yeah, I will say this was a win for you, Dan. This was a win. I enjoyed it. I was like, oh, I get it. It's fun. I can't say it completely holds up, and I'm excited to talk in spoilers more about some of the little weird, you know, the weird decisions this movie makes are almost as interesting as the movie itself.
Dan, go to you real quick before we go to Devendra and me. You said that revisiting it, you kind of were surprised in a few different ways. Can you talk a little bit about that, your most recent viewing?
Well, and I also think it's important to create a little bit of a snapshot of how the movie existed then and some of the craft behind it that Jeff spoke to. Certainly, there's probably some stuff that they just were not capable of pulling off given the technology and the means of filmmaking. But at the same time, this movie is basically like watching. I couldn't really think of it as good a reference as like maybe a Michael Bay movie now. Joel Schumacher was a music video and I think commercials director. So in the same way that Top Gun has that crazy volleyball sequence, and it's like, oh, this and the filtered lens. It's like this movie was a visual, like even the mashup of those ideas that Jeff was speaking to, of like beach soaked and the Tim Capello half naked sax man, like that, and the music that was used in the movie and some of the editing, like that kind of thing was super stylish. Was like, whoa, like the way this movie even worked, and the camera like swooping down was a choice. It was not just it wasn't that way because this is what filmmaking was. It was actually like cool that it was that way. And I think, you know, Jeff was brought up pacing, and there were a couple things, especially at the beginning, where I was like, wow, this movie moves so quick. And even there's a tiny little bit where Jason Patric and Jamie Gertz, they're like doing their first meet cute walk and talk, and they're like just walking to his bike. Like they just started talking, but it's as if they were planning on leaving together anyway. It felt. I also wondered his performance. I'd never really clocked this. Is weird at times, and it was. He felt like he gets into a zone when he's going through the vampiric transformation, and the beginning when he's like following her when he first catches her eye, he's still in that zone before that even like he's acting very strangely, and I wondered if they had shot the opening at the end of the shoot and he just it was a mismatch of direction for him, and anyway, it was very weird, I thought. So there's weird things that probably at the time we just movies moved that way because of the way movies were made, and maybe less reshoots where you could correct things. And so there was some stuff like that really kind of threw me, and I had not remembered. But I think I would imagine part of the reason why it holds up to the degree that it holds up, despite some of the stylish style of its time stylishness. It's because it's also a real movie. It's like very well structured. There's very fun reveals. It's about a family. It's not just like this is a kids movie about the kids. This is a teen movie about the teens. It is about a family dealing with divorce. And there was something that I had never clocked as a kid, where when they first move into the new home and the grandfather is talking about the divorce, I believe, with the mom, and he says something about like you should not have like let him have the house, and
Yeah.
and
You're
she
the
says
only
something like,
divorce. You're the only woman I've met who hasn't been richer by divorce, or something like that.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, great line, and it perfectly sets up this woman who's like allowing herself to be walked over. I wish that what an easy arc she could have had to have made a fun decision at the very end of the movie.
Yep.
And I kind of thought that was what I hadn't remembered the movie perfectly, and I was like, oh my god, genius. And it didn't totally go there, but that was just a great. By the way, movie. One of the writers of the movie, Jeffrey Boehm, who I adored. He wrote Last Crusade, and I think he worked on like Lethal Weapon movies. And this movie, I believe he's responsible for a lot of the movie's fun. And you guys brought up the Buffy analogy. The thing that really landed for me is how much this represented the Joss Whedon voice of pairing really grounded sense of humor with heightened genre stuff. Like it's interestingly, it's dialogue that puts us in the mind of like, oh, this is how it really would be. In my mind, and there was stuff like The Hunger that came before this that I had never seen, and I could be very wrong about what I'm about to say, but I feel like there were Dracula movies forever, and then around this time, once again, I could be wrong, it was, and I know there's like Nosferatu, whatever, but then we started getting vampire movies where it wasn't just like, it's about Dracula and Dracula on screen and all that mythology. It's just, no, wow, wait, people can be turned into vampires. Similarly, like, it does take a similar approach to The Wolfman, to how American Werewolf in London handles with Wolfman. It like slows it down and shows what if you were watching the actual progression happening and seeing someone deal with it. But I did get like twinges of like, oh, it's kind of like they're dealing with if their older brother started doing drugs and drinking, and the family has to be post-divorce and they're having to deal with it, and younger brother having to deal with older brother. I thought all that stuff felt really authentic and good.
It's also interesting, this is a very obvious point, but as you get older, the characters you identify with the most change. When you're a kid, you're really identifying with Corey, and it's like, oh, this fun little adventure he's going on, and man, if I was in that situation, I would be doing the same thing. Now it's like Diane Weist's character that I feel the most for.
Totally.
Right?
Dave, it's so funny you said that. And by the way, I was a huge Corey file. That was another part of my adoration for this movie. This is the one where they met.
The Coreys,
the Coreys, and that also was a real mixed bag of like, there's such the Frog Brothers are great characters. The conceit of them is so fun for the movie, but the take on them is at times so bizarre, sometimes hilarious and great.
It seems like Feldman's a good actor. And he just feels like he was way over directed here. Doesn't it feel like he was just like, he was told to do some of this stuff, the deadpanning and the like,
well, but then also
grumbling.
he affects an adult lower voice. I gotta think that was an actor decision.
Maybe I don't know. I just feel you see him in Goonies, and he does very good performances. It's not that he's this kid actor who wasn't any good. He was a real good actor, and this movie is just kind of doing this bizarre thing.
Totally. But yes, I definitely identify with Diane Weist.
It's like that's more likely a person that you actually know in your real life,
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, you're like, just let her have a date.
Yes, please.
Cool
Come on.
that the movie includes her, and that it's about the family story. It's not kids going on an adventure together. and the production design is awesome, and the costuming is awesome. I mean, I'm curious how you guys feel, but I sort of felt like there's so many of these movies where it's so embarrassing, and this, you guys may say it is, and it could, but I felt like it's so specific that it almost feels like a science fiction movie. It's like, oh, I'm watching a very interesting depiction of a culture, rather than look at shoulder pads, because it's so detailed, everything aesthetically. And when we get to spoilers, we can go into it, but I think this movie has just one of the greatest last lines of a movie of all time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So came way quicker than I had remembered it coming. But yeah, lots of great, genuinely funny stuff to this day. Lots of things were not dated. Some things are, but lots of things are not. So yeah, I really enjoyed revisiting.
All right, Devindra, let's go to you, and then let's get to some spoilers for this.
Sure. Yeah, so I grew up loving this movie. I feel like a lot of people. It was definitely on TV a lot. Like after the point where you had to sneak around and watch on HBO or something, it felt like it was on repeats a lot. I really remember as a kid enjoying the style of this movie, just like the look of it, the way everyone is just like so cool. Kiefer Sutherland is so cool, and his clothing, like it's dated, but to me it's also dated, and like you're saying, Dan, so specific that it feels a little timeless too. Like it still works for me. Vampires in leather on motorcycles still feels cool as hell. There's a chase, not quite a chase sequence, but there's a race at night that looks so cool. I think this movie really evokes Joel Schumacher's best sensibilities in terms of style. I feel like, definitely with the Batman movies, he went way overboard on that, but you get the sense of like he knows how to build a world. He knows how to design a world. This town, Santa Carla, which is that a real town, or are they just redoing Santa Clara?
No, it's fake, yeah.
Yeah,
so fabricated, yeah.
But it feels like as an East Coast kid growing up in Connecticut, where there was like no like nice beaches near me. Certainly, I wasn't like by the water. This was such a weird glimpse of like LA life or California life, and
it's really like Santa Cruz is what it is. Yeah.
The town is just so crazy too. Like they're at that concert, at night, and I'm like, what is Corey Haim doing there? Like, what are the kids doing there? Man, it must have been tough for this mom to bring her children to this town where like it just seems like people are always crazy on the boardwalk. Like something maddening is always happening. And for me,
isn't
this
it also
movie,
interesting how in the 80s there was just no question that the mom would just let the kids go.
Just go have fun, kids.
No idea where they are. No concept of what's going on in their life.
No cell phones or tracking devices or anything. Yeah.
Yes, parenting was different. It was different.
Yeah.
Yeah. And well, for me too, like this movie really holds up in a way because it's not like Gremlins, right? Where the specter of something dangerous from the city and from another culture coming in to invade suburbia. That's not the core of the movie. This movie is about like, this family who is going through hard times, moving to a city, and there's a lot going on. And the people living in that city aren't inherently bad. Like, I love the establishing shots that we get at the beginning of the movie. It's just all different types of people living their chill beach life. Like, there's so much cool stuff going on in this town. This is a town I would have loved growing up in, except for the vampires.
And also maybe the murders.
The murders,
the murder capital of the world.
That's always fun, but it's because of the vampires. So I blame it for that. I don't know. But it just seems like it's so alive. There's so much stuff happening and so much detail for all the background people. And I remember looking at like the shirtless sax man as a kid and just being like, man, that guy rules. That guy must have an amazing life, like this is what he does for a living. He just like is ripped and plays saxophone all day. But yeah, I love every aspect of the style of this movie as a kid. And for me, it really, a lot of it still holds up. I think it still looks good. Some of the special effects definitely feel dated, but I think towards the end where things get really gory, like I love how this movie both starts out as a very teen-centered movie. You get some family stuff, and then it really leans into like the gore and the horror stuff towards the end. So like, as a kid, this movie had everything for me, and I appreciate it. I still appreciate so much of it, and certainly as somebody who loved Buffy growing up, like you can see so much of Buffy in this movie. Like the Vampire's Lair is very much a Buffy set of just like cool stuff happening, like underground. It's kind of grungy. It's modern. You know, they're into pop culture. You know, they have posters in the background and stuff, but they're vampires. They gotta go suck blood. They gotta do evil things. And that juxtaposition of like vampires as pop culture and showing it kind of modern, I found really cool. I will say these days, I'm definitely more of a fan of Near Dark, which came out the same year. Another vampires, I believe, also on motorcycles. Cool punk vampire movie. To me, that one is grittier. It's deeper and certainly better directed because Catherine Bigelow. Come on, I love that movie, but this one still holds a place in my heart.
All right, I'll just bring up a couple of meta points, and then I'd love for us to get into spoilers, talk more in depth about the movie. But one thing is, I think people have already pointed this out on the internet, but the movie Us, the Jordan Peele movie, directly references the making of this film, right? In the opening of the movie, they say, hey, I think they're shooting some kind of vampire movie over there as they're on the boardwalk at the beginning of that film. And they're referring, of course, to The Lost Boys. Which I guess just goes to show you, number one, that The Lost Boys exists in the universe of Us, but also, number two, that movie had such a big influence that, Jordan Peele, generally regarded as one of the best horror directors today, chose to reference it at the beginning of his latest movie. So wanted to call that out. Jermaine Lucier, friend of the show, recently interviewed Tim Capello, the Sax Man.
Sax Man.
And I thought this is really funny. This guy worked with Tina Turner and spent years performing with them. Ringo Starr as well. And in this interview, which we'll link to in the show notes, he says, quote, I was with Tina for 15 years. She was such a huge part of my life. Every day, every night, playing with her, looking at videos from the night before. I did so many records with her. And all this stuff, he's referring to The Lost Boys, all this stuff, it means nothing. I'll go to... Oh, actually, no, I'm sorry. No, that's not what he's referring to. Let me do that again. I did so many records with her, and all this stuff, it means nothing. I'll go to a convention or I'll do a gig, and I'll have a picture of me and her. Maybe I'll sign 1 or 2 a day. It's all just stills from The Lost Boys. That's what people want, and that's what they see me as. And I thought that was fascinating because it's just this idea of this guy who spent years working on legitimately good music that he is proud of, rightfully so.
Are you saying his song is not good in this movie?
No, I'm just saying
he's in like 35 seconds of this movie.
Yeah, he's in about 1 minute of screen time.
It's crazy.
And that like defines his legacy. That's the vast majority of people, when they talk to him, that's what they want to talk to him about. Is this he did 1 day of shooting, and this is the thing that he's remembered for, which I think just goes to show you about the power of movies.
Sure.
And how
pop culture,
and pop culture, and how much of a role it can have in etching yourself into the popular imagination. Go ahead, Jeff.
The power of moving your hips like that is what it's really about.
Indeed.
Really,
that's
like,
the biggest. I remember asking my brother, and I wish I could remember his answer now, about like, was that awesome then to teenagers, or was it weird even then, and I think about like, maybe because it's Schumacher, I go to Batman and Robin, the Blacklight gang.
Sure. Yeah.
That I think as a younger kid, I thought that was cool looking, but I imagine every adult in the audience, it wasn't even cool then, like it's just a crazy stylistic choice. But I don't know. That's such a mystery I want the answer to, of like, was that just awesome? Like people, wow.
I feel like the way the film presents it, where all the kids in that audience are loving it.
Yeah, loving it.
Love it.
Like it's not ironic in the movie, right?
Yeah.
I think the only way you put that in the movie is if you legitimately think it sells something that's awesome and over the top and wild and
crazy town,
like
crazy
a bacchanal. It's like
Yeah.
the idea is this bacchanal is happening, and it's just like no inhibitions, and everybody is just like dancing in the firelight. I think it must have been cool.
I think the thing that really threw me for a loop is this moment when Diane Wiest is in the video store, and the kids are being all rebellious, and she says, "Oh, the kid," somebody says kids these days or something like that, and she says, "Well, all of us were kids at one point. They're kind of just like us in a way, only they dress better." And I thought that really kind of threw me. I was like, "Whoa," because to me, all these characters look ridiculous. But then I'm like, okay, so in your opinion, they look cool, and so does that mean what you're wearing is not cool, right? And I was really trying to like place myself. But I'll just say quickly, I very much enjoyed watching this movie. I had seen it on TV before. I enjoy the economy. Usually movies that kind of fast forward through plot developments or world building or whatever, it kind of bothers me a little bit. But in this movie, it didn't bother me. I think just because we get what we need to get about what the vampires do. They live forever. They need to kill to survive, and they can fly around. And that's really all you need to know. And the movie does a good job of communicating those things.
It introduces the concept of like half vampires.
Yeah, that's true.
You don't really see much, and that is like, and it establishes that like you drink the blood and things start happening, but you're not quite a vampire yet. Like I do love those little things, which are new to like vampire canon.
Yeah. But it's essentially it's a metaphor about growing up, I think, right?
Mhm.
And I do think, like, because of the family thing, Dan, that you mentioned, that it's about the whole family, I do think it does lack a little bit of focus. It's hard for me to know who the protagonist of this movie is, honestly, between Jason Patrick's character and Corey's character.
It's two movies happening at the same
that's
time.
right.
Yeah.
It's basically two
Hashtag
movies.
family is the protagonist, Dave. Like that's what it is.
I was
and
just
this is
talking
such a
with-
great family movie. Yeah.
I was just talking with Patrick Willems recently on one of his YouTube channels about how, like, there's these things called gear shift movies, right? Like Audition is a gear shift movie, or
Oh, yes.
Psycho is
Is
a
it?
gear shift movie. I don't think this is a gear shift movie only because the two movies seem to be happening in parallel to each other.
Yep.
Right?
Mhm.
So it's not like there's a single point in the middle of the movie where it's like now it's a different movie.
This is a
Um,
tango between
yeah,
two
it's
different
a tango
genres. that's
between the
working, and then
wacky-
eventually they start dancing. Yeah.
The Wacky Child versus Monsters movies. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a genre blend. It's Big Trouble in Little China,
Yep.
Scream.
Yeah.
Those are all my favorite kind of movies.
So, but
Um,
yeah, essentially, it's a metaphor about growing up. I think it's like what does it feel like to be 17 and feel like the world is at your feet and all these outside forces that now you have access to, that you don't fully understand, and that threaten to intrude upon and maybe wreck your relationship with your family. And how do you navigate all those things? And the central metaphor still really works for me. So I enjoyed it overall. It's very, very goofy, particularly the parts
Love
with the children and them killing vampire. It's very funny, and like the whole grandfather with the taxidermy and everything like that. It's just so weird. But
I love his compound house. Like as a kid, like I would have loved to like live in this weird thing with animal skeletons, and it's like a big giant like clubhouse too. Like it's a very unusual house. Kind of love it.
Right, but it's kind of those things when you think back on these movies, right? It's those things that really you remember about them.
Mhm.
It's like what Dan said, like the last line of the movie. It's like the taxidermy and the owl and all that stuff like that. It's these weird touches, these David Lynchian things that just seem to come out of nowhere and don't seem to move the plot along at all, that do help to give a movie like this its character. So,
I mean, I thought that was a deft little piece of one. We're enjoying the comedy of the aloof grandfather
Yeah.
that we think is just there for comedy,
right.
and the goofy taxidermy just there for comedy for Corey to freak him out and he can put whatever. But then also creates the fodder for the finale to happen, to allow a way in which they can use their environment to kill, set up for the payoff, and then also to allow the grandfather to just fucking come out firing.
Well, let's
with that
let's move to
yeah.
spoilers now because we're getting to it already. So
Yeah.
we'll just say spoilers for The Lost Boys, starting right now. So yeah, what are some of these decisions? You were already talking about the ending there, Dan, but on the way there, one of the things I appreciate about the movie is that it takes a full, I think, 45 to 60 minutes of its 90-minute runtime before you really see the vampires in full bloom.
Love
know?
it. Yeah.
Before you really see Kiefer with all the teeth and the eyes and everything like that. And that takes a lot of self-restraint, I think, because I think like that's what we as the audience kind of want to see. We're curious, and they withhold that until, hey, now you got to murder all these beachgoers, and that's the scene when you find out. So I did appreciate that. The movie had patience.
Yeah,
Even though it was
shocked.
short.
I was
Sorry.
shocked that we're in this goofy Frog Brothers talking a big game about how they're going to be the ones, and you think every '80s movie you get to the big moment, and then they go humana humana humana, and they turn out, oh, they're just kids. It's Wolfman's Got Nards. It's all that those kind of moments in the '80s movies of the kids who are like, we can do it. Oh no, the Goonies are really kind of not as cool as they think they are, and they have to learn how to overcome it. No, the Frog Brothers fucking stab vampires.
They're murderers.
They just get to the moment. There's dudes hanging upside down. Let's climb up here and stab the shit out of them.
There's a prequel movie to be made about those guys. Like, just like, oh, did you go through this before? How do you know so much?
There is, well, they read comics, but there is still fun with them being in way over their heads and screaming like, children when they're, when they stick the guy in the bathtub and they're freaking out that it happened. And obviously the plan of just stabbing them was, they assumed would be good, and it is clearly not. And then they just start running, oh, we didn't expect them to look. They remember he said something about they scrambled our brains. They looked at us and talked.
Yeah, I mean, they're fun, but I also was shocked that they just like, I'm gonna drive a stake through this thing that looks like a person, and just not care. And it's shocking
through Alex
to me.
Winter, who dies really horrifyingly, I must add.
Yes.
Everybody in the final scene dies horribly. And I think that's part of the fun of the horror aspects of this movie too.
There's so little explained about those kids. We just take them on their word that they just know shit. Like you said, they read comics, I guess, and they've been around. And there's over and over, this movie just doesn't care to explain things to you. It just there's really no reason that Kiefer decides to turn Jason Patrick. There's really the movie doesn't.
That was a
really
little disappointing, I have to say.
Well,
have you seen Jason Patrick in this movie? Like, he's beautiful. Like, you want to add him to his collection. He's gonna
come in. His girlfriend is gonna be into this other guy, and instead of murdering the guy, which you could easily do, and is exactly what you need to live, you decide to turn him into one of you, I guess.
No, I thought that the plan was because the head vampire, forgetting his name,
Max.
wants them to all be one big happy vampire family.
Yeah.
One of his children to have them.
Okay, well, that brings me to the chief thing that I do not understand, that this movie just chooses to have you accept, which is they do this wonderful scene at the dinner date where I
know where this is going. Yep.
Where we are proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Edward Herrmann cannot be a vampire.
Yeah.
Because all the things that happen to vampires, he doesn't affect him, and you go, oh, it's a wonderful twist on this classic trope of the divorcee mom having a terrible meal with the new guy. It all plays so wonderfully, and you get, oh well, yeah, these kids are clearly wrong about this guy. There's got to be some other twist going on, and then the movie just goes, nope.
No. Well, he explains it.
He does explain it at the end.
Yeah. This is my.
Give up your power when you invite them in. Like, that's interesting.
Yeah, the movie hangs a real thick lantern because you're not that lanterns are thick, and I'm definitely mixing metaphors, but it's so. I mean, this is to me the genius of the movie. I was like, I loved it as a kid, but even revisiting it's oh my god, like him making putting real stank on. I'm only going to enter as long as you invite me in. And in the moment, we're going, that's
a vampire thing. That's a vampire
exactly.
Thing.
So it's so great because the movie is allowing the viewer to feel like they are ahead of the twist. Oh, know. Oh my God, it's going to be the guy. We're so good. And then that scene happens, and you go, wait. it's not. How can it?
Right.
It definitely is not that guy. That's
But
crazy.
then they don't earn the way back.
The way back is he says,
Yes.
you did the one thing you're not supposed to do, which is which we're as you go. That's
okay,
right. You can't.
But the one thing I totally love, the one thing you're not supposed to do is invite the vampire in. But but that doesn't magically give him a reflection in a mirror. Like that to have it be you once you invite me in, I can be seen in a mirror. Garlic doesn't affect me. All those like that is a big leap.
Well, you're actually not even. You're cruising over the actual flaw that I don't want to admit, but I willing to believe this movie establishing those rules. I mean, it also establishes that you're a half vampire and you can only be go back.
Of the vampires. He's the chief vampire. What?
But that's
you kill him.
That's this movie's canon. That's not
he's
every
the
movie.
most vampire, right?
Right.
You kill him, all the other vampires change back.
Right. The movie is establishing that as a rule. That is not every vampire movie rule. That is this movie's rule. So this movie is also establishing that once a vampire is invited in, you lose your power over it. Loses its thing. He says he has a line
it's
about
a pretty big stretch to say, okay, movie, you've established that Jason Patric had to be invited in too, and he lost his reflection in the mirror.
Well, that's his house, though.
That's his house.
Yeah.
But no, the real
Corey Haim invite him in. I was watching that whole scene going, well, he has to get invited. That's why he's like outside the window. He's like, let me in. And Corey Haim eventually invites him in.
Well, that's an interesting interpretation.
Yeah, I did not interpret it that way. Yeah.
That actually, but it's interesting because he's in his home already, and then he flies out the window.
Right.
I always thought because, oh my God, uncontrollable flight that is part of his body. But now, Jeff, you just made me feel like, is it because his house is forcing him outside because he can't come back in again until that sounds weird as I say it out loud. I don't think that's it.
Dude, I know that everybody hates it when I suggest better ways movies to move on, but I couldn't help but think that there's so many missed opportunities of really wonderful setups and payoffs or the way things could have gone. I'll just mention two really quickly, if you'll indulge me. The first is that scene where Corey Haim realizes his brother is a vampire. It plays so abruptly, and he buys it so completely, so fast.
Yeah.
When you could have had, it could have been so cool where like the dog attacking him is great, but then he just switches immediately and goes, "You're a vampire. Look, you have no reflection." The movie seems to set up this moment where he's reading the comic book about the things that make somebody a vampire and looking up at his brother and seeing the same shit that he's reading in a book. Like, give me that scene where he's like reading about a vampire, doesn't have a reflection in a mirror, and he looks up and his brother walks by the mirror with no reflection, and then he looks back down and a vampire does this or that, and his brother does like.
Well, that is kind of there. Yeah. That is sort of there with the dogs. That like he's reading about the
it's a leap to go. Oh, there's hell dogs, and then this guy also owns a dog. It's like, okay, I don't know. It just feels clumsy. The second one that I'll say is you have the grandpa going to visit the widow Johnson through the whole movie, which is a complete throwaway nonsense. It's just to get a little bit of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, old guy getting some jokes. Instead of what you could have been doing the whole movie is setting up the fact that he's going over to the widow Johnson's to build a fence. Like the whole movie, he's got to get wood to build a fence, and he's got to do the stakes that are on his car just show up at the end. Instead of like it being this cool thing of like, oh my God, he was doing. It's like a missed opportunity.
What you did, there is a clear moment where he's building a fence around his own home with giant stakes sticking up.
All of a sudden building giant stakes. He could have like the whole movie could have been setting up to that. Instead of just like the last 20 minutes, grandpa's now building giant stakes in the yard for some reason. Instead of like. The whole point of the widow Johnson is to get him off stage, is to like get him to another place so he's not involved in what's going on at the house. And you could have used that for two purposes. You could have used that to set seeds of his eventual return with the fucking awesome steaks instead of just being like, oh, now he's got steaks.
Well, I feel like what you're saying is sort of how I feel it exists. Not, but even with the Corey thing, like, yeah, he buys it so quick, but it's quick by a scene, not by by 20 minutes. But I just want to say, Jeff, the thing you're cruising over with the argument of, like, once again, I love that this movie is establishing a rule for itself, which is once you invite a vampire in, whatever. The problem for me, and maybe I'm overlooking something, but I think, and it may even be why subconsciously you're feeling it, Jeff, is the finale.
Right.
I could believe that they all can enter because they invited that head vampire in, and these are his minions. But then garlic and holy water and all those things shouldn't work.
Garlic didn't work. The garlic
didn't, but the water did.
Yes.
Basically.
The water did.
Yeah.
By the way, great scene of them just like, no dialogue, just going to church, filling up all their bottles. There's
great scene.
Amazing.
The other thing that kind of bothers me about the end is the final battle between Jason Patric and Kiefer Sutherland, or I guess it's between Jason Patric and Edward Herrmann, is like, I'm gonna try to push you into the antlers. No, I'm gonna stop you by holding onto the door jamb. All right, I'm gonna push you into the antlers. What changes? I just wanted it more. Like, there's nothing. That sequence, I felt like missed a beat of what allowed Jason Patric to do it when the other guy couldn't. You know what I'm saying?
Well, he's
like
using the other guy's strength against himself as opposed to having to use his own strength to do it.
Vampire judo.
He's also got a great line. Isn't he? I'm trying to remember what the line is.
It just felt like it could have been. It was. I tried to do this. I prevented it. No, I'm going to try to do this, and you didn't prevent it. It just felt like there could have been some way to have gone over the top. It wasn't paying off something that was set up in Act 1. But go, oh, he's using the thing now. The only thing I'll say is he is holding in, trying to prevent himself from being a vampire the whole time, and finally he accepts the burden of it and then uses it to not to succumb to it, but to fight back against.
He goes full Dark Angel, basically. Yeah. Not Dark Angel, the show, Angel from Buffy.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Shout out to Edward Herrmann, by the way, in this movie, who I love, an actor I love. Good. Always good. Grandfather from the Gilmore Girls, like, he's so good, and he has so much fun in this movie, I think.
The scene that really haunted me as a kid, that still I kind of got why, was the tree where they're in the trees.
Mm-hmm.
And the real assault, the first real, like, full on vamp assault, and
at the bonfire,
biting into the back of the guy's head. They're like ripping off a scalp.
Oh my gosh, that's so upsetting.
It's really it's kind of reminds me of Event Horizon's sequence like that. Event Horizon, is that right? Yeah, Event Horizon.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's so gory, and the combination of that kind of terror, amidst everything else, just starts to make it all feel like, oh crap, it's going down. It creates real fear
really quickly at that point, and I love that. Like, this is why it's rated R, right?
Yeah. Jeff, did you remember? I think the reason why this movie came up as much as it did is because anytime the earworm for me, they mostly come at night. Mostly for this movie is maggots, Michael. You're eating maggots. Yeah.
So good.
Did
Honestly,
that stick out to you, Jeff? Or
yes, 100%. I think I've actually seen that clip before. As much as I've never seen this movie, I think even as a kid, there was kids talking about the maggot scene. Like, the maggot scene as a kid is everything you're afraid of, right? Because you have this weird thing about food as a kid anyway, and you have a thing about bugs as a kid, and the idea that watching that scene, it's so weird. It's just like, hey, have some rice.
Have some bare white rice.
Yeah, have some rice,
1 billion Chinese can't be wrong.
Yeah, have some rice, Michael. Don't be cool. Have rice like all the rest of us. And then he has some. He's like, why are you eating maggots, Michael? And he spits it out, and he's like, what's wrong, Michael? It was just rice. It's such a weird, like, it's such a poorly executed zinger, it's like a bad punked,
Yeah. It's like weird Bowie from Labyrinth energy a little
Yeah.
too. Like there's a lot going on
They
there.
actually satirized that exact scene in What We Do in the Shadows. If anyone's
Yep.
seen that movie, where
Mhm.
they're eating the spaghetti, and he's like, why are you eating worms? And it actually fits in much better in that movie, in my opinion, that movie / TV show, because it's just so silly what is happening. So
That, by the way, this is where the love scene happens, and I think that is a perfect
Yep. The soundtrack.
encapsulation of,
Yeah.
at the time, a super style, like, wow, cool. That like dissolves as they're, and totally you don't blink. Like, yeah, oh, fine, we're getting to the scene that is in every movie that I go to see at the theater, where there's a love scene, a love montage. But today it's like, what? It's so weird. And way too quick for them to get to that, like, not the right time.
Speaking of things that really kind of blew my mind, I think I guess it's like Diane Weist's old bedroom, right, is where Corey is sleeping in, right? On the closet wall is a poster of what I believe is Rob Lowe,
Definitely
yes, the
Rob
weirdest
Lowe.
thing in the movie.
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
looks exactly the same today, and it just is like, it just is.
Wait, Dave,
mind-blowing.
Is that the most
Lowe's vampire.
The most
Yeah.
mysterious thing in the world is why he has a poster of Rob Lowe on his wall.
Yeah.
Oh no,
From
it
when
doesn't
she
hold
was
up.
a
And then you
kid?
just blew my
What?
mind that it's because it's her old room.
Yes,
but
it's her
no,
old room, I think.
No, but she's not.
She's
Yeah.
older. That would have been 20
Rob
years
Lowe
ago.
was on his wall because it's 87, not.
Oh
because it's
yeah.
60.
Hey, come on.
But
Come on,
that's
Dave.
guys. What I'm saying is that's what Rob Lowe looked like in 1965.
No,
Yeah. And
There's
it's also what he
always
looks
been a
like
Rob
today.
Lowe.
Yeah.
Rob Lowe is a vampire. We know this.
Yeah.
All right.
It's such a weird
So
touch.
gents, I gotta ask you. I mean, first of all, let's talk about the last line. I guess, Dan, what is your assessment of what the grandfather knew about the vampire? Like he I guess he always knew about the vampires, and did he?
Yeah. Did not
what
warn
is the
his
grandfather's
family.
story basically? Like, when he's coming in at the end? Does he knows there's a vampire attack going on in his house, so he loads his car up with stakes and drive? Like, what is
First of all,
happening? What is
I
happening?
really don't want to look too deep at it.
You
I
just love
want
it
to
too much.
enjoy it.
Okay, fair enough.
And that's certainly how it's meant to feel. It's a great kicker. But if I have to look deeply, if you force me to, yeah, I think that he's over it. He's like, as he said, one thing he couldn't stand about this town, all the damn vampires. And his kids, his grandkids are like forcing him to have to friggin', oh God, I guess I have to do something about
Yeah.
it. And he does it casually. And then, the one thing that's really weird about that last moment that always threw me for a loop as a kid, and my wife was kind of watching over my shoulder, and I could feel her being confused too, was that because of the tone of that last moment, because it's leading you towards something that you feel, and because he takes a drink of that
Yeah.
Right.
dark liquid, you feel like the end reveal is going to be
Well, also,
yeah.
the movie does so much work establishing the fact that you don't touch the second shelf of food.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes
Right.
to, like, the movie, there's a whole scene that it seems like a big setup for something. Don't touch the second shelf. So only the
Right.
things that I eat are on the second shelf. And then he goes to the fucking second shelf at the end of the movie and drinks something, and the movie's like, I don't know. I
Well,
don't know.
he says, he says it says root beer, Chef, and
Yeah,
presumably he's drinking a root beer at the end. So
Yeah.
Come on, Jeff.
there's a little bit
no,
of a
definitely.
payoff.
Set up
that's-
and pay off.
That's
Come on.
definitely a huge payoff, Dave. Yeah.
Here's what I was upset wasn't paid off, was the fact that he gives young Corey a hard time about the TV guides. He says, hey, make sure
Love
you're
that.
going to be tempted to remove the sticker, but it's going to rip the cover of the TV guide. That's going to really irritate me. I'm like,
I think that was just to establish his eccentricities. you
Yeah.
know?
well, I would argue it's not eccentric at all to not want your TV guide to be ripped.
I mean, that
It's
was
very
like
normal.
straight truth. That
Yes,
was
that's
like,
what I'm
I
saying, yes.
totally remember that. Yeah.
Very rational. Very rational. Okay.
That was just Joel Schumacher saying, one of
Yeah.
his pet peeves in his movie.
That was his anti-motion smoothing PSA. Yeah.
It's like, hey, remember when we had TV guides because we needed info, like we needed a book, literally
Oh.
a book every week to tell us what was actually on TV. And then remember when we had video stores, the good old days.
Dude, you guys, we haven't mentioned the best line of the entire movie.
What's that?
Michael, there's no TV. You know what that means? There's no MTV.
That was great.
So in
Love it.
terms of weird reactions that people had, I do think the one other thing I want to bring up, and then I want to ask you guys about the sequels. But the one other thing I want to bring up is that it just something that there's just a new Dracula on Netflix, right?
Which is great. Oh yeah,
Yes.
you guys talked about it.
I didn't-
Yeah,
I
They
didn't
all
care-
hated it. I loved it.
I didn't care
You guys
for
hated
it.
it?
I didn't
I
care
think
for it,
it's
but
half good, half bad.
yeah. But one of the
Right.
cool ideas that Dracula brings to life really well, I think, is the idea of if you have lived for hundreds of years, like what would that do to you? Like how would you perceive the value of human life if you had seen generations of people just come and go? And that was kind of clanging around in my head when Corey Feldman plunges a stake into Alex Winter's heart and Alex Winter melts. And I'm just like, I just thought to myself, man, how many adventures have all these guys been through together? Have they known each other for like 500 years or like 3,000 years? How long have they been together? And then one of them just straight up dies. There's very little mourning for them.
Yeah.
Which because can you imagine like being with these people who you roam around murdering beachgoers with so much
Hello,
so that the
Dr. Sleep. Like that is the entire Dr.
right,
Sleep.
it's
like,
the very
bandwagon
Dr. Sleep, and it's
people.
like,
Yeah.
and when people died in Dr. Sleep, you really felt each death. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, I have
Yep.
been on freaking, I have seen millennia happen with you, and then now
Yeah,
you're,
empires rise. and
yeah,
fall,
empires
And
have
also-
risen and fallen, yeah.
I expected that to last forever. We were going to live
Yes.
forever.
And now this kid, is who caused you to die. I wish there had been a little bit more of a reaction to that. Kiefer mentions it at the end. He says, you killed my friend, and now, but it's like they don't even pause for a moment to like mourn this person's death, who presumably they've been adventuring with for a really long time. Anyway, just wanted to express that. A
They
little.
could actually go back to bed.
Yeah,
but-
they just go back to sleep, I guess. So, have you guys seen any of the sequels to this movie? I
No,
wanted to ask
I have
you. Or-
not.
No, nothing.
No.
Have you?
No, but I'm just curious because this is, as you said, such a cultural touchstone.
But those were not real.
Yeah,
They're like those sequels.
don't exist.
They're the equivalent of like they're made sequel to oh my
Straight to
god,
DVD.
War Games. The Omega Code or something. They're just what we used to say at the time, straight to video sequel. They're not. I think
Oh, look at
Corey
them all.
Feldman
There's
might
so
be.
many. You guys, there's so
So
many
many.
of them.
How many? I thought there were only like 2.
There's only 2. I
Lost
think.
Boys, The Thirst. Lost Boys, The Tribe.
It's weird. It's weird. There's a sequel for Inside Man that is out there right
What?
now. Yes. There's
Yeah.
a sequel to Spike Lee's Inside Man that you can go rent or purchase digitally right now. So these things are weird. It's just
Yeah.
happening
Corey
all the time.
Feldman's in them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, but it's not
The
like
Continued
Richard Donner
Adventures of the
and-
Frog Brothers, right?
Oh, boy.
Yeah, that's the only thing. That's what they had to bring back. I mean, I don't, I've not seen. Maybe they're awesome. I haven't seen them, but it didn't feel like it was authentically made.
Right.
You know,
I
think
wanted
it
to ask you this question though, Dan. Is watching this movie, everything feels super dated, right? It's very much of its time, and it's actually valuable because of that reason. Because it's preserving this entire aesthetic of this time period in this movie. And I guess I was wondering, you are a filmmaker, and I'm curious, like, as you're making things, when you're thinking through the costuming and the production design and such, is that ever a concern to you about how dated things are going to be? Like, do you try? I feel like there's 2 extremes. One is to make things so that they will age extremely well, and one is to make things so that they are very much of their time, so that you're preserving the style and aesthetic of a specific time. Like, do you think in those terms at all when you're making things at any stage of the production process?
100% that stuff comes up, but usually it's just resisting. There will be things, lines of dialogue that will feel, if you have a character say something about emojis or texting or sexting or what, like
Yeah.
that's the thing that is just not, even though it feels like, oh, this is on all of our minds right now. It's gonna be so funny to have this character say this thing that feels like it's we're all gonna get it. That's exactly the kind of thing that is just not gonna hold up.
I was
And
wondering
same thing-
why you had Mary Elizabeth Winstead say that thing is so radical and tubular in the movie, but
the- the-
weird decision.
the same goes for visuals. The thing I've may or may not have said on the show before. I say it quite a bit in conversations with friends, is that the difference between Ridley and Tony Scott is that Ridley Scott is way ahead of his time. And almost all of his movies,
Yeah.
you could release today
Yep.
and save one or two tiny things. You would think they were just made today. They are amazing.
Yeah.
Tony Scott, of his time, of
Yeah.
every time, right? The most 80s filmmaker that ever 80s, the most 90s filmmaker that ever 90s, and the most early 2000s. You know, in the 80s, it was the, heavy color saturation and smoked out frames and flash frames and the cutting the editing that you see, especially in like the Top Gun. Once again, the volleyball scene being the pinnacle of that. And then the 90s, like Enemy of the State and the Hans Zimmer score and all, and then the 2000s with the subtitling, the Man of Fire and Domino, the aesthetic that was in hyper editorialized, like it was so cool to see. Wow, no movie functions this way the minute that it comes out, and then like 1 year later, it's like, whoa, that looks so old. That's so 90s or whatever it is, but those things are so tempting because in the moment it feels so new and exciting. But it's one of the parts of the Spielberg thing and Zemeckis and all those guys is those guys are classical filmmakers. They don't often, aside from, I mentioned Zemeckis, and of course I know, aside from the motion capture animated stuff, but filmmaking wise, they're not doing even Spielberg was Saving Private Ryan, the Skinny Shutter, like that influenced so many movies going forward to do that. And Tony Scott, and even really did in Hannibal, which is, sticks out a little bit in his filmography. For him, when Spielberg did it, it was to perfectly capture the filmmaking or that we would see in watching old newsreel footage of war at that time. And it was for a very specific reason. He never did it again, But every other filmmaker then used it as a gimmick that wasn't for the same reason. It was to accomplish something else.
Ridley Scott's Gladiator too. I
was going to say Gladiator too, which is So there's exceptions to his timelessness or to his ahead of its time.
Right.
But in general, most of his work holds up whatever decade you're going to decide to watch it in.
Yeah, indeed. Well, this is definitely a movie that's of its time. But it is an interesting one to watch today. And I think there's, as you pointed out, Dan, this is a movie that has stood the test of time, not necessarily in terms of style, but in the sense that people still talk about it and it's very revered today. This interview with Sax Guy that Jermaine did, this is like a month ago. And people still think about this movie. They still talk about this movie.
All you have to do is say Sax Guy from Lost Boys.
Wait, speaking of Sax Guy, there's one thing we didn't touch upon. Which is the soundtrack. I'm so curious to hear Jeff's impression of it because that's one of the reasons of why I loved it as a kid. Is that main theme song.
Oh yeah.
I was like, it was like my favorite song, and it was so interesting compared with the imagery that it was set against. It also is one of my favorite pieces of score that is unreleased. Like I've always been trying to track it down. That Thomas Newman did. The soundtrack includes some weird thing he did. It doesn't include like the main. The fun music when they're going to decide to go kill them in the end and all that. So, but the soundtrack was a big deal, and the Echo and the Bunnymen doing "People Are Strange."
Yeah.
What did you? Good.
It's good. It's really good. Yeah, and as you said, that sort of main theme refrain that keeps popping in. It pops in like at least 3 times in the movie.
Yes.
That is. I can't remember the line, but it's like it's very haunting in its own way. Of
"Thou shalt not kill" is
right. Thou shalt not kill.
Yeah.
All that stuff. So cool.
At least 4 times, I believe.
Yeah.
They really hammered it home.
It's I don't know. I found it effective. It's
cool.
It's such a neat tone because it's got this celebratory feel to it. It's like it's an anthem, but it's also haunting and
melancholy. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really good. Yeah,
I would actually
I'm glad
cite
you
that.
pointed that out.
I would say I'm glad. That's awesome that you felt that way. That heartens me, and I would point out that's sort of a precursor to well, lots of movies do this, but certainly Jordan Peele with both Get Out and Us uses a not pop culture song, but a song, not a piece of score, but a song that has a real dense tone to it that overshadows, and both I think are used in the opening credits. At least I know Get Out's one is. But really creates atmosphere, not just through score, but through the choice of music.
Yeah, I want to even underscore that. I think it's the perfect word to use, atmosphere, because that like choral singing of "Thou shalt not," it actually fills out the world in a really interesting way for me. I think that is part of what I was talking about with feeling like everyone at that Saxman concert is a vampire, because it feels like, you know, this feeling, we are legion, you know, that there's everybody is chanting this refrain that is about being a vampire, and it just feels like it enlarges the world just in one simple bit of music. It was really effective. I'm glad you brought it up.
All right, well, I think we can wrap it up there. Those are our thoughts on The Lost Boys. You can find more episodes of this podcast at /filmcast.com. Email us at /filmcast@gmail.com. Our spoiler bumper comes from filmmaker and YouTuber Kyle Hillinger. Our theme song comes from AdamWarrock.com. This episode was edited by Beatty Zhang. Stay tuned to hear what we'll be discussing next week. In the meantime, Dan Trachtenberg, thanks so much for joining us today, man. Really appreciate it. Where can people find more of your stuff on the internet?
Thanks for having me, dude. Twitter, Danny TRS. But I mean, Black Mirror's on Netflix. I did an episode called Playtest from, I think it's the 3rd season, and The Boys is on Amazon. And I did the first episode of that show, The Boys, which will be back soon for season 2.
Did you see Charlie Brooker's comments about Black Mirror recently?
No, what did he say?
He said,
it's too depressing to do more.
It's too depressing to write more Black Mirror right now.
I don't blame him. Yeah.
I think they were in the middle of shooting or post on the season of them, I think. But yeah, I agree with him. He's man, that guy. It's the scary. His predictions have always, not just on the show, but even it was Brexit and election when I was working with him, and he said a lot of things that I laughed off and ignored and was like, "Oh, you're just nihilistic. This is just you." And they've come true, and so it's very frightening whenever he has a feeling. I'm terrified to ask him his feelings.
Stop saying things, Charlie Brooker.
Yeah. Also, what has come true is right now everyone here is part of a terrible simulated video game. That's your thing, I think, actually, Dan. Okay. Anyway,
I wish it were just a video game. Yeah. So anyway, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, really always appreciate it. Jeff Cannata, where can people find more of your work?
Well, I'm doing lots of other stuff, actually. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff Cannata, which is spelled with 2 N's and 1 T. I have a video game podcast called DLC. You can find that at 5by5.tv/DLC or wherever you get podcasts. I do a comedy science show called We Have Concerns, award-winning. We stopped doing it for 2 years, and now we're back. You can find that at wehaveconcerns.com or wherever you get podcasts as well. And I also do The Dungeon Run, which is a long-form Dungeons & Dragons show. It's basically just a big, long, epic tale of adventure. And man, last week's episode, many people said it's their favorite one ever. You can jump onto any of them. It's so fun. I'm so proud of it. Please check out The Dungeon Run. You can watch it on YouTube by searching for The Dungeon Run there, or as an audio podcast by searching for The Dungeon Run. Or you can watch us live as we record on Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Pacific time at caffeine.tv/The Dungeon Run.
How about you, Devindra?
Oh, you can find me on Twitter at Devindra. I write about tech at Engadget.com. And I'm also doing the Engadget podcast. Check that out. I'm in the middle of reviewing all the new Surface devices, kind of back to back to back. So check me out talking about that with Alex Kranz from Gizmodo.
And check out the other podcast I do. It's called Culturally Relevant. You can find it at culturallyrelevantshow.com or wherever your podcasts can be downloaded. We got some great authors and writers and directors coming up in the near future. So again, it's Culturally Relevant. Next week, we are continuing this trend of each of us selecting an older film and forcing the others to watch it, maybe forcing themselves to watch it. Devindra is going to be choosing the movie for next week. Devindra, what is that movie?
It is going to be it's going to be Juzo Itami's Tampopo. This movie is perfect. I love it. So I cannot wait to talk about it with everybody. It's on Criterion Channel streaming. Just go buy the Criterion Blu-ray. Watch it before next week.
All right, Tampopo. I've heard it is delightful. I've heard it's amazing. I can't wait to check it out. But yeah, you should check it out. Dan Trachtenberg, I wanted to ask you, do you subscribe to Criterion Channel? It seems like something you'd be into.
Yeah, I don't. It would be something I'm into, but I'm already. I'm not. There's just.
It's too many things to watch.
I want to hear our excuses, Dan. Come on.
Yeah, it's impossible. There's so many things already available to me, and all the. I can't. It like the idea is that this movie came up. Wait, did you say The Lost Boys is on Criterion Channel?
No.
Tampopo.
What did you say to me was on Criterion Channel?
Next week's movie, Tampopo.
Tampopo.
I know. Was that what you were referring to? Maybe that.
Yeah.
Now I'm realizing that's weird. Plus was on Criterion Channel.
I mean, it should be.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but what is it, a subscription thing? What's the deal with it?
Yes, you pay like $10 a month or $100 a year.
It's just
it's
totally
totally
weird
worth it.
when you have to seek out one movie to see, and you go, "Oh, I'm gonna have to pay for this movie,"
Mhm.
because outside of when you have one thing that you must see and you have to seek it out, there's so many things that I know I need to watch,
Yeah.
whether they be a new release that I had not gotten around to, whether it's, oh my God, I love that movie. It's been forever since I've seen it. I want to see that. That's on the list. Versus, oh, here's a thing from back in the day that I never saw that I should see. Like, there's so many of those things on every. I go to
Yeah.
Netflix, I have a list. I'm on Amazon, I got a list. I got HBO streaming, and I'm on. There's a bunch there. That I'm like, and they're gonna leave the service soon. So I never need to like. I feel like I don't need a new one of those. Criterion Channel would create such a list for me.
I agree. It can be stressful. It can be stressful because you're basically you're paying money for this thing, and then you need to use it, right? So otherwise, you feel like you're wasting the money, and then it's like, well, and with Criterion especially, there's so many amazing movies on there. So
the one nice thing is that they have a lot of editorial
that's
control.
nice.
So they recommend things, they double bill things, they give you reasons why, hey, maybe check this out this week because
It's
of
very
this and this.
curated, Dan. It's very
But
curated.
I don't need. That's the last thing I need is something to recommend. I have my own overwhelming, self-imposed list of things.
Dan already has too many neuroses. He already has a lot of
Yeah.
Me. Yeah.
Well,
He's
in any
getting
ca-
recommendations from Charlie Booker.
Yeah,
and,
come on.
John Goodman's
J.J.
probably sharing
Abrams.
some things with you. Anyway,
J.J.
J.J. Abrams is giving you the hookup. So, all that said,
None of those things are happening, but yeah.
all that said, Tampopo, it's the movie for next week. I'm looking forward to talking about it. Hope you enjoy revisiting it or seeing it for the first time if you're out there listening. That's going to do it for us today. We'll see you next week. Hey, Dan, thanks a lot. We're still broadcasting, but I need to take a moment, take a 30-second break.
Are we stopping our recording?
No.
Do I hit
You
stop?
guys, Dan, stop. You guys keep rolling, okay?
I'm stopping, but it's
Are
the
you
end of my
sure?
recording.
Yes.
Whoever's listening, it's the end.
We're just gonna keep rolling.
Jeff and
through-
Devindra, keep rolling, okay?
Sure. Okay.
Keep rolling. All right,
They-
Dan,
they've
thank you so
run.
much.
Okay,
Thanks,
wait, wait.
Dan.
Really
What do
appreciate
I do?
Oh, I will text you an email address. So export as WAV or AIFF.
Okay, so I go file.
Yeah.
I could help.
Yeah, you can walk him through it, and then I'll text you the email address to send to. Okay.
Okay.
Do not
say
File
it
is wave. Yeah.
Export as wave. Yeah.
Okay.
Do 16-bit. You'll probably see that there. And yeah,
Yep.
that's it.
I'm calling it.
I'll be right back.
Yep.
Okay.
Dave is in a hustle.
Yes, to nature's calling. Wave sign 16-bit PCM.
That's fine.
Save and let me do my desktop.
And just we transfer a link to Dave.
Your tracks will be mixed down and exported as
Yep.
one stereo file.
That's fine.
Okay.
You have multiple
it's-
tracks?
Well, I'm looking what happened. I have a mono track, but then
Uh-huh.
above it is a stereo that was recording nothing. Like somehow it did that.
Oh. It'll be fine. Should be fine. Save that project in case we need to go back and save anything there.
Should I not mix it down? Or no, that's just
Oh yeah,
It's
Sorry
fine.
about that.
Mix it down.
It's fine.
You guys still there?
Okay.
That's
It's just
fine.
gonna take extra time on your computer to
Yep.
work.
Okay. And then
Yeah,
let me
thanks a
try-
lot for recording, Dan. Hopefully,
Hopefully it
It's gonna
works.
sound
we'll
better,
see if it
yeah.
sounds better. If it basically, Beatty knows if it doesn't sound better, we'll just use the backup recording I made. So,
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
but appreciate you doing that.
Sure. What if I didn't hang up, guys? What if I just like
hung out.
I mean,
Stay
you're
here.
you're welcome
You
to.
can
go.
hang out. You can be in the show if you
yeah,
want.
yeah.
I gotta go. What is the next part?
Nah, in that case, I'm out of here.
What are you guys doing?
We just got what we've been watching and other random things.
The beginning.
So-
Yeah.
What have you
I
guys
think we should
watched?
talk about this shopping cart issue, David.
No, we shouldn't.
Few things have blown up in my mentions like this shopping cart situation.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do it. Let's do it.
What have you guys watched? What are you talking about?
Nothing that exciting.
Okay.
We
Yeah,
saw
it's a Seinfeld thing. Yeah.
we saw Seinfeld's new thing. I saw Rambo: Last Blood using Twitch's. This is actually super
Oh,
cool.
probably. I thought of that. I haven't seen it, but I thought of that with the end of the Lost Boys because I was like, oh, it's Home Alone before, and
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, but wait. If you haven't seen it, how do you know it's similar to The Lost Boys?
well, because that's the premise. I saw the trailer.
Yeah.
okay.
It's in the trailer.
Yeah,
The
okay.
whole house thing. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Isn't that the whole movie or no?
It's like the last 20 minutes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought the whole movie is like.
No.
Him just waiting for people to come into his trap.
Oh, no, I just thought it was.
Great.
All right, guys, it's even Lost Boy. Wait, hold on, I just don't. Okay, wave. Okay, cool. All right, so here it is, and I'll email. All right, so have fun. I'll email this to
Yeah,
whatever
use
you-
I would use wetransfer.com. That's generally how I do it, and they'll like ask for your email address, and they'll email you like a code to confirm that you're not a robot.
Okay,
but
this
you can.
is many more steps than I signed up for, but
I'm
You
very
just-
sorry about that, Dan.
You could just drop a file. It doesn't even do the code anymore. I don't know.
okay. All right, thanks, guys. I'll figure it out.
Later.
Thanks, Dan.
Cool.
Take care, bud.
Bye.
We also need to mention Demolition Man 2.
Oh yeah.
We do. All right, let's go.
All right, ready?
Yep.
Let's just go into it, okay? Here we go.
Yep.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Slash Filmcast. I'm David Chen, and with me are.
Devendra Hardawar.
And Jeff Kanata.
Welcome to the show. Today on the podcast, we got a couple emails and follow-ups. We're going to follow that up with some what we've been watching, and then move on into an in-depth review. This week, we'll be reviewing The Lost Boys with director Dan Trachtenberg. And The Lost Boys is part of our new series of film reviews that we're doing. Older
Yeah.
movies that are either on our list of shame that we have not seen, and that we therefore want to use this podcast as an opportunity to watch those movies, or movies we just really love that we want to force the other co-hosts to watch, right? So The Lost Boys is Jeff's movie. He has never seen The Lost Boys. He's like, let's all use this opportunity to watch The Lost Boys, and invite on an old podcasting friend
Well,
to join us.
The truth is, when we were talking about all of this as what we might be doing as a way forward for the podcast, I texted Dan and was like, Dan, I know you have a list of movies for me that I haven't seen that you have been. And he's like, The Lost Boys! The Lost Boys! And I was like, all right, I forgot.
great,
just
great Dan
scroll up
impression,
in
by the way.
my-
He sounds exactly like that. He sounds
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, I've been working on that impression
Yeah.
for a while.
All right. So, couple of announcements / follow-ups that I want to discuss before we get to what we've been watching today. First of all, about a week ago, or a couple weeks ago, I should say, we had on writer-director, Emmy Award-winning writer-director Alan Yang on this podcast to review a movie called Demolition Man. And Demolition Man is a movie that is very fun, stars Sylvester Stallone, Wesley Snipes, and even though it didn't do super well in its initial release, it was a very beloved movie. And proving yet again that the Slash Filmcast has captured the zeitgeist and is a great predictor of the zeitgeist, I would argue. We learned that a Demolition Man sequel is in the works almost immediately after that podcast went out.
Coincidence? I think not.
I
You're
think not.
welcome, world. You're welcome.
I
It
mean,
wasn't
also
like,
Demolition Man, I should point out, is also on Hulu right now. So it hit Hulu and then the sequel was announced.
We
Yeah,
should also mention that the way that the sequel was announced is that Sylvester Stallone recorded a video on his phone as if pressured by the overwhelming demand created by the Slash Filmcast.
Right. It wasn't like a press release went out or anything like
This
that.
wasn't a planned event. This was a man who is going about his life, and all of a sudden, the overwhelming attention, the white hot spotlight of the Slash Filmcast was pointed at one of his old movies, and he felt it essential, nay, required, to comment. Just saying, we have a lot of power, fellas. We have a lot of power.
Well, on that note, it appears that an Extraction sequel is also in the works.
Yeah,
by the way.
you're welcome, everyone.
Yeah. So that's another thing that.
So, get ready for those Lost Boys sequels. Oh wait, they were already made. QED. I rest my case.
Any opinion on what the Extraction sequel should be called? By the way, because I've seen a lot of people use the phrase "nextraction,"
I mean,
which
it's kind of, you can't beat that, really.
you think so?
Next distraction.
Nextraction. It's not
Next.
next traction, Jeff. It's
it's
next.
going to be a subtitle. It's
It's
going to
a
be
portmanteau.
Extraction. Yeah, New York City Rundown. Something. I don't know.
Well, I
Maybe
heard
another Extraction somewhere else.
what I'm hoping for, because I heard this was a possibility.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that it is a prequel. So next distraction would not be appropriate. It could be prestraction or distraction. I don't know.
It
Wow.
really bothers me that you are saying it as next distraction
Yeah.
because it's a portmanteau.
Because when you
Jeff.
say it something like somebody is stretching their neck. Or their neck is in traction. I don't know.
We can all agree all these ideas are bad. Okay.
yeah.
I think.
So Demolition
I-
Man sequel and Extraction sequel potentially on the way. Who knows? If
Don't you guys think a prequel is a better idea? Like find out
You
what
really want to have your interpretation of the ending be true,
don't.
Jeff.
It's so
I
true.
don't. I don't know if that's the case.
He's
Sorry.
dead.
Who
He's
is he
dead.
gonna
That's the-
extract next? Is my question. That is what I wanted to know at the end of Extraction.
President's
Who
daughter.
is going to
Come
be
on.
extracted next?
Who did he previously extract, David?
Okay. We got
What
this,
was his training regimen for the extraction?
We got this email from Aiden from Lincoln, Nebraska, who writes into /filmcast@gmail.com. Hey there. It was great hearing about We Make This Look Good and the Worst Idea of All Time podcasts on this recent episode. As a listener to the Worst Idea of All Time since 2015, let's pause for a moment. The Worst Idea of All Time is a podcast in which the co-hosts watched Grown Ups 2 every single week
Yep.
until, quote unquote, it became worthwhile. So Aiden writes in, as a listener to the Worst Idea of All Time since 2015, I can say that the wild premise is a way to draw people in, but the true magic of a show like that is hearing the hosts grow in their abilities to approach the material in new ways, find new things to say about the movie, and generally become better friends. The Worst Idea of All Time has done 4 main seasons, and there's a particular magic to that first season with Grown Ups 2, leading up to some truly ridiculous final episodes. They're currently running a miniseries where they watch Home Alone 3 a few times per week for the remainder of the quarantine, and recently saw Cats 7 days in a row. Above all else, it's about the hosts and their ability to entertain. Imposing limitations forces them to be reactive, if even for their own sanity. It's a fun format, especially when you can binge listen to hear how things change over time. That email comes from Aiden from Lincoln, Nebraska. I think defending the honor of Worst Idea of All Time from Jeff Kanata, who was
I respect that. I respect that, and I certainly wouldn't want to cast aspersions on a fine podcast and fine folks who create it. I know it is difficult to make podcasts, but I feel like you can achieve the same goals and not have to torture yourselves or drive yourself mad. This descent into madness idea of the podcast is, to me, I'm still baffled by. But to each his own, and I'm sure it's very fun to listen to. And I have my indictment is not for the people who choose to listen to it. I can totally understand the entertainment value. My indictment is the people who choose to do that to themselves.
Right.
I don't understand why you would want to.
I do think it's this idea of like imposing a limitation, right? This reminds me of that.
Mhm.
There's this movie I saw a long time ago that like apparently no one else that I know has seen, but it's an amazing film. It's from 2003. It's called The Five Obstructions. And it's directed by Jorgen Leff and Lars von Trier. And essentially, Lars von Trier meets up with Jorgen Leff, who's an experimental filmmaker. And Jorgen Leff made a movie called The Perfect Human in 1967. And Lars von Trier says, I want you to remake this movie, but I'm going to impose 5 separate obstructions. So, for instance, obstruction number 1 is you must remake the movie and no shot lasts longer than like 12 frames. Right, and so he needs to redo the movie with no shot lasting longer than 12 frames, and then he makes a movie, and he like remakes the movie and uses that obstruction. Then the next one, he'll say something else that's different, and so on. And it was just such a fascinating exploration of filmmaking. I wish more people have watched this movie, but anyway, it really helped hammer home the idea to me of sometimes introducing an obstruction is something that can create a lot of creativity or ingenuity because you need to act within certain constraints.
I could not agree more. I am a big proponent. The way I have always described it is a picture needs a frame, and oftentimes you find these filmmakers in particular, artists in general, but filmmakers in particular, who reach a certain status level and have complete freedom. And almost always that results in work that is less focused and not as good, frankly. And I think having framing mechanisms, having limitations, almost always improves a thing. And the creativity is increased and required to work your way around the things that you're not able to do. And I agree 100% with that. Not exactly sure that's what's exactly happening here, but okay, I'll buy it.
It's basically, imagine making a weekly movie podcast, but you had to watch the same movie every week, and it's a terrible movie.
What if you made a weekly movie podcast, but there are no movie theaters open?
Yeah.
There's an interesting dilemma. What do you do?
I have been really interested to read all this stuff about what's happening with movie theaters, right? And you guys may have seen this, but Tenet is theoretically going to be a movie that is going to be the first one to reopen movie theaters,
Good God.
which is going to come out in July.
What a thing! What a thing when you're Christopher Nolan and you've doubled down on movies need to be seen in theaters.
Yeah.
Like his whole worldview is IMAX theater experience, and then all of a sudden there's just like, nope, no more theaters. Wow,
So, Tenet is currently scheduled to open in July 27th. I'm sorry, July 17th right now. I apologize. And I've seen some chatter online. Like, it's very easy to see a headline that says something like, Christopher Nolan is like single-handedly driving, the opening of movie theaters on July 17th.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's easy to assume he's a villain because he all he cares about is making a lot of money. I don't actually believe that to be true.
Has he spoken on it, or is it just, hey, it's still scheduled?
People have commented on like working with him. I don't know that he has publicly said anything about it.
Okay.
But what I think is the case is that here's what's undeniable. He believes in the theatrical experience, and he wants to do what he can to save theaters, because it's very possible that if theaters don't have a huge opening, like, we are going to be looking at a much different theatrical landscape when theaters do reopen than we had before. And I don't think people really fully understand the magnitude of how different it's going to be. And Tenet is one thing that can theoretically drive people back into movie theaters. This is Christopher Nolan's one of the few people that can open a movie on his name alone. So until I learn more, my assumption is going to be that Christopher Nolan believes in the theatrical experience and he wants to preserve it. And that's,
you could still have that.
And that's why he wants to reopen movie theaters with Tenet, is because,
or just delay it like every other movie. Like, to me, First of all, it's
Well,
not.
the
it's-
argument is
yeah.
financially, like delaying
Yeah.
it further will be catastrophic. I think, like,
For-
To the whole
For-
system.
for
To the
the
whole
system.
system.
to the
of
whole.
theater.
I think movie theaters are already in a very bad financial situation, and
Sure,
that like
sure.
delaying it even further than July,
Yeah.
is going to be bad. Now, I you know. I am not at all commenting on whether you should go see Tenet or not. I'm just simply trying to kind of trying to see into the mind of Christopher Nolan. He believes in theatrical experience. He wants to do what he can to save it. I am not at all commenting whether that is the right decision for you as a moviegoer to go see it. Right? I don't know if I would go see Tenet if it came out
No.
July 17th.
I wouldn't recommend anybody go by July, like especially here where we have nothing. We have no solutions in sight. We don't have more testing. We don't have, people behaving responsibly. I can't trust theater goers. Like as much as, oh man, like delay it. Delay it seems like the only option, even though it could mean bad things for a lot of theaters, because otherwise, yeah, you're putting people's lives at risk. People will die to go see this movie. I'm not sure that's what Christopher Nolan wants, and we don't want theaters to be known for that. This is a
Right.
microcosm of the whole like opening up for economic recovery idea, and it's like, who are you really helping here?
It's true.
I
It's
don't
true.
know.
The idea
it's true.
of-
Like,
of
are you willing
s-
to risk your life to go see a movie? But here's the thing, though. I think a lot of people would be willing to do that. And does that mean that we should not allow them to? I will
I mean,
not.
it's a weird,
yeah.
it's a weird thing to, like we risk our lives to go see the movies every time we go to a movie. I get in a
Sure,
car and I get
sure.
on the freeway every time I go to the movie. I'm not saying it's the same level of risk, but I think it's a weird phrase to be saying. I agree that it is a new paradigm.
Yeah, that's the
and
whole point. Yeah.
I am also reminded as somebody who worked in a movie theater my entire high school life, the thing you do as a movie theater employee is you grab this little tin thing with your bare hand, you stick it in a giant pile of popcorn, and you lift that popcorn and you put it in buckets, and then
Mhm.
people eat that popcorn.
Yeah.
That is a wild thing that I've literally never thought about before. That my bare hand stuck into the giant popcorn machine, filled popcorn, and people then ate that popcorn. It just boggles my mind that I've never thought about that as being an atrocious act.
Well,
You
to
know?
be fair, I want to be very careful. There is no evidence that coronavirus spreads through foodborne, contamination in any way. At
No,
this
I'm
point.
not talking about coronavirus. I'm talking about when I was in high school. I'm talking about the idea that I just look at things differently now.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
we all
Yeah.
watched that movie Contagion, whatever year that came out, and we all thought about that for like 2 days after we saw it, and then conveniently forgot again. But my mind is thinking about these things in a more permanent way than ever before, and I'm re-litigating all of these moments in my head of like,
Mhm.
I just thought it was okay that someone's grubby ass hands went in the popcorn machine, including my own. I didn't wash my hands every 15 minutes when I was working at the movie theater. Are you joking? I went in and cleaned movie theaters and then came back out, and it's anyway.
Please go on, Jeff. Are you saying you cleaned bathrooms and then went back out and served popcorn?
Well, I would wash my hands after going to the bathroom or entering
Or
a
cleaning
bathroom,
the
but
bathroom.
I would go in and clean the movie. I would pick up a broom that some 14 other employees picked up, and I would sweep the popcorn off the floor, and then would go back out and work in behind the
Yeah.
counter and handle money, and then go into the. It's insane. It's insane.
Yeah. I just want to clarify before we move on that I'm not taking a position on Tenet specifically, but I do think that as goes Tenet, so goes the movie
Yeah.
industry, at least for Q3. Like
This
that,
is so yeah. yeah.
we're gonna see.
you-
It's gonna have
can you imagine
long-reaching
yourself-
implications. What happens to Tenet? I think so.
Sorry.
Ugh.
Can you imagine yourself sitting watching a 2-hour plus movie with a mask on in a theater that has only a third of the seats filled with people because there's spacer seats and all? I mean, I feel like that's the world, right?
Yeah,
That's
I can't imagine doing that, but it's so irresponsible. It's so like I've been thinking about the idea, the great filter idea, for
Yeah.
cosmic civilizations and things that stop
Terrifying.
civilizations from happening. And it's just like, no, it's really what it is. It's, a series of filters for every civilization. Right now, like all we need to do, because there is no help in sight thanks to our government, is act responsibly. And we cannot even do that. And now it's like, yeah, now some people want to reopen certain businesses. And yeah, the movie industry really wants this one thing to succeed. When is it worth it? I don't know. It's going to be
Yeah, but
terrifying.
have you seen that one video where it's all a hoax, you guys?
Mm.
There's
I
that
did.
one video.
Yeah. Everything is
So-
so stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem really sad, and I think what's sad about it to me, Devendra, is that it's a cultural thing. You know, it's not like a scientific. It's not like we as a species have not figured out scientifically how to solve this, because
Yep.
with social distancing, with economic stimulus, other countries have shown the way on how to do this. But just like with guns, it's like even though other countries have demonstrated you can avoid a lot of suicides and mass casualty incidents by some pretty logical gun laws. Not saying no one can own a gun, just like saying like let's introduce some decent legislation here. Similarly, we've seen other countries have been able to manage coronavirus way better than us, and because of our quote unquote democracy, because of the culture of rugged individualism that we have. And that like only my needs are the most important. We are in,
and also
a
other
situation
people
where-
are getting hurt, therefore, and those people matter less to me. So yeah,
Yeah.
gotta love America.
Yeah, so that's kind of what's going on. But
The
Tenet,
Tenet looks real good, you guys. I'm excited for Tenet.
we'll see if Tenet is ever released in theaters. But I do think it's gonna be a bellwether, and
Yeah,
and
I'm
we'll see what
thinking it's gonna
happens.
be like that Simpsons episode where like Bart couldn't see a movie in the theater, right? And it wasn't until he was what was he, like a Supreme Court justice? He went to go see the movie with Homer like 30 years later. That's gonna be us with Tenet.
Cats in the cradle in the sea. Have you guys? I want to ask a legitimate, although comparatively unimportant question, and that is, if in some strange universe, in some strange future moment, they actually make the decision that Tenet was not coming out in theaters, but will be video on demand, do you watch Tenet for the first time on your
Oh, hell
television
yes.
at home? Yeah.
Hell yes.
as
I'm not
opposed,
afraid.
as
feel
opposed
like-
to what though? What's the alternative?
Wait for the theater.
Waiting for some way to watch it on IMAX, which is the way I would prefer to.
This is
that
this is gonna
movie-
be the ultimate test of your stamina, Jeff.
right. Yeah.
Because
I mean,
that
I
could be
feel like
that could be
the-
years away. What you're describing,
I
right?
feel like the
Yeah.
first way that I want to see that movie is in IMAX.
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
an IMAX movie. I don't.
In an
I don't
IMAX
have any
theater
desire
with
to
tiny seats, with too many people around me, like as God intended,
Yeah.
that is how it should be. But
But you guys are
Yeah.
guys are willing to forego that experience just to
to save
consume
my
the film?
life, yes.
No, no, no,
Jeff.
no, no. That's not the question
Yes.
I'm asking. I'm trying to create a question that has nothing to do with it is, like I said, a comparatively unimportant,
Well,
trivial
the choice
question.
is because of the danger of going to the theater.
No, I
Like,
understand.
that's
I'm not.
entirely-
I'm not.
yeah.
I'm not trying to set the question as do you risk your life or do you not risk your life. I'm
Right.
saying do you watch the movie just to consume the movie, or do you wait in a hope that you can consume the movie the way you would want in some future where that is safe?
I'd watch the movie. Come
Yeah,
on.
I'd probably watch the
Yeah.
movie. I'd be a very like. Here's the thing with me, Jeff. I get so stressed out, even before the Slash Filmcast. Like whenever we review a movie and it's out and I haven't seen it yet, I get stressed because I'm always worried about being spoiled on it.
Yeah.
Well,
And
I'm
so-
gonna take this further. Then I'm gonna take this further because I know this is just a thought experiment, but I find it fascinating. If the only way you could watch Tenet was to watch it on your cell phone,
No, dude.
What
but
are you
everybody's
doing?
watching
What are
it
you
on their
doing?
cell phones.
Well, the first scenario actually might happen in the real world, Jeff. This is
but
just
Yeah.
I'm asking you to do a fucking thought experiment. I'm asking you to jump with me into the realm of just what is important to you.
yeah.
like-
Okay, no, fair enough. I would not watch it on my cell phone.
Yeah. Would not watch on
So
my
I would
television
say-
at home,
yeah.
television at home, you feel is not compromised enough to.
Correct.
You feel like you would still get the because I feel like that movie is an IMAX movie.
Yeah.
Well, sure,
yeah.
but this is all very obvious, Jeff. Like, yeah, nothing. There's no good video experience for
I
me.
don't understand why
on
you
my
guys are
phone.
resisting my fun thought experiments so hard.
Fair
I'm
enough.
just trying to understand where your line is of.
The line is not phone.
So,
for
but
sure.
Jeff, you're saying you would not watch Tenet on your TV? Is that what you're saying?
I feel like I would not want that to be the way I watch that movie. Yes.
It's gonna be hard to even
this-
go through life if it's out like digitally and trying to avoid spoilers, Jeff, like it is gonna be very hard because like
I
the
agree. I
memes are gonna be everywhere. It's gonna
understand that.
invade pop culture like Inception, like yeah, references, everything. It's gonna be like
So-
Lost Boys all over again, except you
I'm gonna-
want to see it.
Yeah, exactly. Like an idiot, I'm gonna go back into the breach on this one and ask you guys to make it because I'm trying to understand: is it purely a size issue of the screen? Like, is it purely like, okay, cell phone too small, home television big enough, but there's a
Well,
point at
home
which
theater, not also just home
Yeah,
tele.
home
Like I'm
theater.
not gonna
The
watch it on a
sound is
30
important
inch,
too, yeah.
you know, crappy TV or something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the sound is important too. So
sound, size, quality, all the fun stuff.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna bet that our listeners, I think this is more interesting than either of you guys do, and I'm curious what people think. Is there a movie that you feel like would only be a big screen experience and that you would forego watching it just to watch it? Because I feel like, I know you guys are going to make fun of me again on this one, but I feel like the Avatar sequels are that also because they're going to be in 3D.
Sure.
I want to have the biggest screen possible with good 3D. I'm not going to have that at home. I wouldn't want to watch that for the
Yeah.
first time.
In a normal world, these judgments all make complete sense. Yes.
That's my point. That's the fucking point of this thought
Yeah.
experiment. Is that I'm throwing out
I'm
the
cool-
fact
I'm
that we're
cool
not in
with
the
it.
normal world.
I'm cool with it, Jeff. I'm cool with the thought experiment. I'm cool with the
Okay.
I initially resisted because it was so outlandish, but I now understand what you're trying to do. So it makes sense to me.
I will
the
let it
way
go.
you've set it up. So I'm no longer against the thought experiment. But yes, I think actually we've heard from many listeners for whom this is the case, right? Many of our listeners, I remember receiving an email a long time ago where someone had seen, had a baby around the time that Force Awakens came out,
Right.
and like couldn't see Force Awakens, and they and
Mhm.
like but saved themselves to see Force Awakens, right, until the movie,
Yeah.
until they could see it in theaters again. And I think that's a very common trade-off people have, especially with kids. So,
Yep.
Anyway, it's a decision
What you're
many people
saying
make
is
all the time.
kids are the same as the coronavirus.
That's not what I'm saying, but okay.
That's what I heard.
Speaking of things that changed forever as the result of coronavirus, you know, we talk about movie theaters, but also, I'm probably never going to shake hands again for the rest of my life. I've decided.
Don't shake hands. Don't
I
hug.
always
When you see-
hated it. I always hated shaking hands, and now I never need to do it again. And
Yeah,
that's
the one good takeaway from this is that we can settle on a stern like nod when you greet somebody.
yeah.
Like
No, what you have
acknowledge
to
that
do-
person. That's it.
Dave, what has to become your thing is the extend your hand, but then it goes up to your temple like the fawns.
Yes.
That should be that's your thing. Is
Yeah.
the gotcha psych out hand thing.
I'll get right on that, Jeff. I'll get
So
right
then
on
I
that.
Because then
love
you're
these
cool.
culturally relevant references.
Okay, let's move on to what we've been watching this week. So I had a chance to watch. Okay, so I actually did something really cool this week, which is the Twitch, which is a company, website company owned by Amazon,
Mhm.
released this really cool feature this week called Twitch Watch Party. Now, or they had already had it in beta, but now you can actually very easily use it. And I had tried doing a watch party earlier with this thing called Netflix Watch Party. Netflix Watch Party is a Chrome extension. And you basically get a bunch of people together and they watch a Netflix show together. And it really didn't work very well, in my opinion. It's designed by, I don't know, a couple people. So it's not like, or one or two people, or, you know, a small group of people. And there were a lot of bugs, and we had trouble getting everyone in sync. And at times it looked like somebody could actually like take control of the video feed and do their own. And I was just like, this is a bad experience. Like I was thinking, because many of us are inside right now. Many of us are working from home or in quarantine right now. And so replicating the experience of watching a movie with friends is something that I wanted to try to do. So I tried Netflix Watch Party. Didn't work out very well. Then Twitch recently announced that they had released this feature called Twitch Watch Party. And how it works is it's, as far as I know, it's in the U.S. only, or U.S. is one of the countries that it works in. It's not international yet. And you start broadcasting yourself on your Twitch feed, and then you choose a video from Amazon Prime to watch. And everyone else who tunes in also needs to have Amazon Prime, and then you can all watch the movie together. And it's in sync. and you can chat together. And I basically broadcast a Skype call with some friends, and you can like basically have commentary on the movie. And it worked really great. And I'm planning on doing more of them. But it was a lot of fun. And the movie we chose was Rambo: Last Blood, because I thought, hey, this is going to be a fun, silly movie. And it's not going to be too serious, and it'll be a perfect example of this. And it was great. We kept track of
We
the
should
body
do
count.
it, guys. We should do it.
I think we should
as a
do it.
show.
I think we
Yeah.
should totally do it. But yeah, we did a thing where we watched Rambo: Last Blood. We kept track of the body count, which by the way is 48. 48 people die in that movie. And the Rambo movies, I would say, are outright offensive at this point. You know, I think they offend my sensibilities, but they are really fun to watch. Every movie, like First Blood, was such a great psychological thriller, action thriller movie about a Vietnam War vet trying to adjust to life back in the United States. And then every movie after that has been a cartoon. And it has been about watching Rambo murder people murder non-white people in increasingly creative and gruesome ways, is what the Rambo series has become.
Mhm.
And that reaches its logical conclusion in Rambo: Last Blood. And it's basically like Taken combined with the Rambo movie. And there's a lot of people that got blowed up and shot up real good. So if you like to see some non-white people getting killed real bad and tortured to death and murdered, Rambo: Last Blood's a great option. But it led me to reflect on like why is it that this franchise went to this place? And I think that with many sequels, any action sequels like even the Rocky movies, Sylvester Stallone's other franchise, or looking at John Wick from a modern day perspective, like all sequels feel the need to Die Hard, another example, right? All sequels feel the need to one up what happened before, right? And that means more people, more action, more stakes, more people getting killed. And you extend that to its logical conclusion, and you get things like Rambo: Last Blood. You get just things that are basically just really cartoonish. I think you called John Wick Chapter 3 a cartoon in our discussion of it, Jeff.
Yeah.
In
In a good way. In a good way.
Yeah. And so it's not like there's no enjoyment to be had, but it's just really very far a departure from the initial film. So that's Rambo: Last Blood. The movie is what it is, but it was a lot of fun to watch and make fun of with people. And
Yeah.
so I'd recommend Twitch Watch Party as a way to do that. So that's something I've been watching. I also had a chance to watch something you had a chance to watch as well, Jeff Kanata.
Yep.
Jerry Seinfeld, 23 Hours to Kill, which is his new Netflix special. So Jeff,
his first new stand-up special in I don't know how many years. A lot of years, right?
Yeah. So there have been other things that have
Right.
come out since then. So
Yeah, he
for instance-
redid an old material as a new special, but this is like the first new hour that he's put out in a long time.
Right. There was Jerry Before Seinfeld, which I think we actually talked about here on the podcast.
Yeah.
Jerry Before Seinfeld, which is a documentary. There was the comedian documentary about how challenging it is to come up with material. But I think the last special was I'm Telling You for the Last Time, right?
Yeah.
Which came out in 1998. So it's been over 20 years since he's released just a straight stand-up special. And of course, he's also done the Comedians with Coffee and that stuff. But
Right.
what did you think of Jerry Seinfeld 23 Hours to Kill, Jeff?
I really liked it. I thought it was very funny, especially the second half, which is a lot of his musings about marriage and his personal life. It's sort of weirdly bifurcated into two sections where he literally stops the show at a point and goes, "Okay, I've told you about my observational stuff. Now we're going to go into my personal stuff," and he really marks it like that. And I found that interesting, and I prefer the second half, although the first half was very funny too. This is a 65-year-old man. I was surprised how energetic he was. I don't remember him as a stand-up being that physical with like there's a part where he like lays down on the ground and he's constantly moving and flailing about on the stage, which is not how I remember Jerry Seinfeld doing stand-up. I thought that was kind of interesting to see him work that way. But my biggest takeaway from all of it, as much as I laughed quite a lot, I laughed a lot, which is, he's a very, very skilled comedian. But my biggest takeaway is how it came out. It was made before a paradigm shift and came out after a paradigm shift.
Right. Yeah.
It
So I
is
actually saw
wild.
him perform this set, or a set very similar to this, live, actually, in Seattle.
Yeah.
But that was years ago, right? And it was
Yeah.
the same material as he was doing years ago. So
I mean,
Tell-
it's very good stuff, but I think the entire first bit is like, this is what going out is. We love going. Everybody wants to go out. It's like, no one's going out, Jerry. No one's going out anymore. That's from a different time. We don't go out
Well,
anymore.
it's about how terrible a burden it is to go out. That's the thing.
Yeah.
And everyone watching it is like, I would kill to go out right now.
Right.
You know.
Right. Yeah. There's another thing later that is like exactly about something that just isn't in the world anymore. What is it? Shaking hands? No, I can't remember what it is. But there's some other bit that he does. It's an extended sequence that is just like, this is from a different time. It came out now, but this is like a window into a time where humans did this. Gosh, I wish I could remember what that was. But it's strange. It feels tone deaf almost, but it's not any fault of his because he's speaking about a world that once was really recently, but just feels so long ago now and so different from the real world. But I found it to be very funny. I enjoyed it much more than I thought I would, even as a fan of him and his stuff. I just thought it was really finely crafted and top of his game, really.
I think he is very, very skilled. I super enjoyed watching him perform this live a few years ago in Seattle, and it is clear there's a reason why he got to where he is. All that said, I do think it's very like boomer humor. I wrote a Letterboxd review of this movie or this special, and I said this is like a comedy special version of the old man yells at cloud meme from The Simpsons. Where it's like he's a cranky old man. He's a cranky old man,
but
and
like
he's
to make that a knock against. I think that's a feature, not a bug. I think that's what he's selling right now. That's his brand is the observational stuff. Used to be like, hey, isn't it weird that we all have to do laundry? And now it's like, the world is. And he straight up says it. He's like, the thing I love about being in my 60s is that I don't give a shit anymore. I love that whole bit where he's like, you don't even have to respond to people when you're in your 60s. You just like motion, you grunt at them. And I think to kind of lay it out that way as a knock against it is kind of to miss the point.
Well, I'm not necessarily saying it's a knock against it, but I am saying that is the style of humor. And I think there's many people for whom a lot of these observations might seem quite warmed over, like complaining about texts, oh, the texts and kids with all the texts these days, and your YouTubes and your texts, it's just like
also his like extreme position of privilege too. Like I actually really like comedians in cars getting coffee, but I feel like that show knows what it is for his stand-up without having that context of being in a fancy car and talking with a major celebrity. It feels a little different, right? Like he can't speak to what we're all actually feeling.
I think it would surprise you how much millennials hate this style of humor, Jeff. Like I was reading through Letterboxd and it's just like review after review of people just freaking ripping this thing to shreds. And I'm just like,
okay.
I had a great time with it in person. I had a good time with it watching it now. It's a little bit weird now because of the coronavirus and everything, but I had a good time watching it, but it's just like, it's very clear to me that there are a huge subset of the population for whom this humor does not work, and it is a bug, not a feature. So I just want to.
So why does that matter to you? If you thought it was funny and it worked for you,
well, I guess I think the point of this, part of the point of when we talk about these things is to say like, hey, I certainly like watching people's heads get cut off. But like, if you don't like people's heads get cut off, like you might not like it. I think that's a reasonable thing to say on this podcast in which we review movies and TV shows.
Okay.
So similarly, I'm saying, hey, this okay boomer style humor might not be your thing, but if it is, you're gonna love Jerry Seinfeld 23 Hours to Kill.
All right, fair enough. feel like it's
Listen,
relevant.
everybody
to
else
say,
is John Mulaney, okay? Like we're
Yeah,
not.
dude,
we're
you
not,
got your
like,
John
desperate
Mulaney
for
if you like
comedy
your
out here.
younger
I
things.
feel like
you know?
it's relevant to say if you don't like head cutting off movies, don't watch this movie. If the movie isn't called Heads Cut Off all day long, I saw heads cut off all day long. I should point out, if you don't like heads getting cut off, because I feel like this is a 65-year-old man who was on TV in the 90s. Like, what else do you expect? I don't know. He's not going to be like, doing a hip millennial, humor. He's going to be, and I think that he actually, I don't mean to defend him in the sense that I am personally offended. I don't care whether you like it or not, but it sounds like you did like it. I just thought he handled that privilege thing kind of in a funny way, where he was like, life is hard for everybody. Life is hard. It's hard for I mean, it's going to be less hard for me, but it's hard. He has that whole moment where he's kind of, I thought he handled all that stuff in a really kind of funny way. And I didn't interpret the texting stuff as like doing jokes about how hard it is to text when you're 65. I just thought it was more like, here's texting situations that we all get into that I think are applicable to any age, but perhaps through the lens of a 65-year-old man. I don't know. You're fair to have your opinion, but I don't know. I thought I'm just saying I was surprised at how little it felt like it leaned in, but I'm, in my 40s, so take it for what it's worth.
I will say also, I do think it's just a fascinating, there's this meta psychological study that I think the special is, because he points out, do you know how many people who've been through what I've been through or done what I've done would still be here, right? Like, he points that out. And
right.
Jerry Seinfeld's net worth is around $1 billion, right? And
that's wild.
He's somebody who has documented like how hard it is to be a comedian, and you wonder, like, what is it that drives someone like that, right? If you had $1 billion, but you still, because you are, I do think that regardless of how much money you have, anytime you step out on that stage, you're putting yourself out there. You're allowing yourself to be laughed with or laughed at or laughed near. And
there's no universe in which he's doing any of that for the money.
Right. No, 100%. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So it's like, what drives someone to do that, right? And like,
I think that's,
yeah.
I don't know. I in my worldview is that is the best reason for anyone to do anything. The worst reason for anyone to do anything is for the money. I think that I respect that more than anything. Like, the idea that a person would be driven to create, even if it doesn't mean they get food on the table, that's a beautiful thing.
I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying that when I think of myself, like, and if I had $1 billion, I probably wouldn't be going up on stage anymore and subjecting myself to doing like whatever the hell that got me $1 billion in the first place. You know what I mean? I'd probably be like, that part of my life is over. I'm gonna do the things that like make me the most happy. And for him, that's what this is, right? And so you are seeing somebody do something that he really loves, and that is kind of like, from a psychological standpoint, in my opinion, kind of dangerous, because you're up there, and a lot of things could go wrong. People might not laugh, they might heckle you, and for someone to keep doing that night after night, it's just interesting to me. It's interesting to me, and the special Jerry Seinfeld 23 Hours to Kill offers a window into that. So anyway. If any of that sounds interesting to you, you should check it out. It's out on Netflix right now. All right. Before we get to our review of The Lost Boys, we got to thank people who donated to the podcast. We got to thank new subscribers, the Georgian family, for subscribing at the rate of $2 per month. Thanks also to donors Gus Kim, Cameron Wilson from Auckland, New Zealand, Neil Smith, Britt Jordan, who wrote in a very lovely note to us, from Brooklyn, New York, Dave Esposito, who's just directed an 8-minute comedy called Not a Clue on YouTube, Chad Franks, and Michael Crowder. Thanks so much for your donations. Thanks also to Peter Turnbow from San Francisco, California, who writes in, longtime listener, first-time donator, thanks for keeping the podcast going during these hard times. I especially enjoy the weekly COVID-19 updates and the kid TV reviews. As a parent of 2 girls, age 4 and 7, I'd like to suggest that your first mistake was actually watching TV shows with your kids. There's nothing better than catching up on Westworld or some emails while the kids watch some inane Netflix show about ponies or princesses. Stay safe and keep up the great work. That's Peter, who is in stay-at-home week 7 in California right now.
Wow.
So yeah,
It's important to note which week you're in, so that when Dave forgets to read this for years at a time, we can place it in the chronology.
So this was an interesting email because it suggests, Jeff, maybe you shouldn't watch things with your kids. What do you think of that advice?
Eventually.
I think Peter says your first mistake, which of course the first mistake was having the children in the first place.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
We're never going to let our kids hear this episode, Jeff. Yeah.
No, of course never. No, the first mistake, of course, if your goal is to watch shows or have peace of mind or do things, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
No, I'm not of that perspective. I genuinely do want to watch things with my kids, so I know what they're consuming and can relate to. We try to talk about things that they've watched, and I understand that. I once asked my mom, how did you do it? How did you do? You were a stay-at-home mom. Like, I can't imagine staying at home. And now I'm doing it because of COVID. But I was like, I can't imagine. Like, I can't imagine. How did you do it with 2 kids just all day long? You were the only person that was taking care of us. You had no help. How did you? And she turned to me and she goes, honestly, television. And so I understand the television as babysitter, the necessity for that, not even just the the use of it. It's sometimes it becomes a necessity. I've just really tried hard not to lean into that too much personally, but there are times when it's just like, watch whatever the damn thing you want, and I will try to stomach it or zone out and pull up my phone or whatever it is.
One thing,
and also certainly when they get older, by the way, is that we're going to have a cutoff, right? Like right now I watch Peppa Pig with my, 18-month-old daughter because I'm sitting there with her and I want her to like learn things. But, by the time you reach 6 or 7 or 8, like, they're off doing their own fun things. It's fun.
Right.
Yeah. So you might as well watch stuff with them while you can, you're saying.
Yeah.
I think what has been interesting is that this idea of like policing screen time, I've heard, has gone away in the COVID-19 era.
It is certainly in my house. That's been the case for sure.
There's all these principles that we used to hold dear, like, hey, let's limit the amount of screen time, or minimalism. We gotta keep as few things in the house as possible. That's all just fallen away.
Hey,
in light of the
I'm gonna
pandemic.
watch my diet and try to exercise.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, we got this message from donor Scott Anderson, who writes, "Thank you for getting me through many long days at work. I deliver oxygen and other medical equipment to patients on hospice care. Obviously, with everything going on, it's made my job infinitely more stressful. Thanks again, and stay safe." We've gotten quite a few messages from people who say, "Thank you for doing the show," given that they're an essential worker, and they're listening to the show while being an essential worker. And so we are very grateful that us messing around on Skype can help provide you some distraction, and thank you for everything you're doing. We appreciate
We're so
it.
pleased to have any kind of positive impact. So, yes, and stay safe, and thank you.
This one comes in from Jeff from Fort Worth, Texas, who writes in, longtime listener, first-time donor. While the great work you do on the show is certainly worthy of donation, this gesture was made with a small request. I'm passing along enough to cover each of your upcoming months of basic Hulu. My hope is that you'll check out the new limited series Normal People. It's easily one of the best new television experiences available. I've never been this emotionally short-circuited by a show before. Haven't stopped thinking about it since my wife and I finished it this week. Its intimate portrayal of young love and how it changes its central characters as they weave in and out of each other's lives over their formative years is astonishing. It never leaves their perspectives or subplots or distracting storylines. It tells a story with brevity. None of its 12 episodes are longer than 30 minutes and focuses exclusively on the scope of human emotion that exists between two people. It's amazing how much I was invested in the story. I was constantly a wreck throughout, and just when I thought I found my footing emotionally, the show's closing minutes utterly disassembled me. The music, direction, photography, and the two young leads are masterclass. What's so funny, Jeff?
Sounded like you said I'm constantly erect throughout.
Did I say that?
You said I'm constantly a wreck throughout, and it sounded like you said I'm constantly erect throughout.
It's the whole extraction thing all over again, Jeff. I
This is a beautiful letter. This
I
is
was a
beautiful.
I know, it's
constant
beautiful, it's
wreck
beautiful.
throughout.
I'm a child. I'm sorry.
I was a constant wreck throughout. And just when I thought I found my footing emotionally, the show's closing minutes disassembled me. The music, direction, photography, and of course the two young leads are masterclass. I've never experienced anything like it, and I think the three of you, especially you, Jeff Kanata, will find and appreciate it as well. Can't wait to read the book it's based on. I'd love nothing more than to hear any of you discuss your thoughts on it soon. Either way, appreciate the wonderful content you put out each week. Keep up the great work.
I have actually watched the first episode of this.
What'd you think?
It did not grab me, but hearing Jeff's impassioned and engorged view of it, no, sorry, his impassioned plea.
Terrible.
Terrible. Why would anyone say that? It's, millennials would not enjoy that kind of humor. The I will.
I think
will
you're right
continue.
about that, actually.
I will continue. It was highly recommended to me, and I turned on the first episode, and I just kind of felt like, is this all it is? Because it seems like a very lovely window into young love, but I felt like I was waiting for something else to happen, but understanding that that's the point, perhaps I'll watch it with new eyes and stick with it. So thank you, Jeff, for the lovely donation, and I will revisit.
Yeah. I've been
everyone is
waiting
saying
to check that out, by the way, but it sounds heartbreaking. It does sound like I have to prepare myself for this whole thing, like prolonging the before sunrise sunset movies basically over a series. So yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is I've heard it's excellent. Everyone is like, but it's like, is that a story I want to immerse myself in right now? You know, do I really? Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
Maybe you want to see Rambo instead.
Yeah,
you know?
that's
there
right.
you go.
That's right. And who are we to judge?
No judgment. Sometimes you
judgment.
need it.
No judgment. Let's get to our review of The Lost Boys.
All right.
Please stop your recording.
We did.